Chapter 11. A Visit to Remember. It took about 5 minutes for me to explain and get the dwarves to calm down after I told them about the fact that I was in fact a dragon. I held off on telling them about my heritage and connection to my mother, the storm dragon. The reason being, I didn't feel safe talking about that within the walls of a foreign nation. Still, though, they were pretty accepting of my race after the initial shock and quickly moved past it, so we could enjoy the rest of the night celebrating with some pretty elf girls. Now, you may be wondering why I was willing to risk revealing my dragon form in foreign soil. My reasoning was simple. My current form was cute as hell. I'd learned that lesson after getting smothered by the goblinas. The doorbell to the bar went off as we entered the elf bar went off as we made our way inside. Immediately we were greeted. "Hey Rimuru, don't you think you're enjoying yourself a little bit too much right now?" The teasing voice of Kaijin snapped me out of my paradise as my body stiffened like a deer in headlights. Quickly recovering, I turned towards Kaijin. I'm pretty sure any straight man would sink into bliss under the attention of such beautiful women. So don't judge me. I shot back at the blacksmith, still a bit embarrassed at having been seen in such a state by my future subordinates. Beautiful? You really are a flatterer. The blonde elf in green commented with a squeal and a blush. I chose to ignore the toothy grins I saw coming from Kaijin and the dwarf brothers through magic sense. "All right, everybody, who's up for some drinks?" The eldest of the elves asked. "Me." And so we all sat down and got some drinks, talking about a bunch of stuff along the way. I talked to Kaijin and the dwarf brothers about my recent birth and adventures, leaving out the part of my mother and reincarnation, of course, and they told me a bit more about their lives as well. I even went on to tell the dwarves a bit about the situation in Jura and my plans for it in the long term. "You must be pretty strong if you were welcomed into an ogre village, Rimuru," Kaijin said as he downed a drink. "I mean, I know you're a dragon and all, but given your age, it's a bit unexpected. Maybe I don't think myself as that strong. When compared to the likes of demon lords, or even the storm dragon, I'm just a small fry," I said with a shrug. I knew I was strong. My mother had told me, just after she named me, that I might just be the strongest creature within the entire Jura forest, and thus far, I'd yet to see any creature strong enough to contradict her words. The area where I truly lacked was fighting experience. While my experiences from my previous life in the military and special forces meant I wasn't starting on ground zero, I was still far behind in terms of what was required to survive in this world. Comparing yourself to a demon lord and true dragons is a little unfair. If you're strong enough to earn the respect of an entire ogre village, then you have to be at least A rank or above, Kaijin said as he looked at Rimuru with a knowing grin. "Maybe. I haven't had the chance to test my strength in full, so I wouldn't really know," I said with a shrug. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. I truly hadn't fought anyone who could offer me a decent challenge, but I had a feeling that trainee at the very least would prove to be entertaining. She was by far the strongest individual I'd come across in Jura, even stronger than that mage in Gelmud. Still, though, that didn't give me a measurement as to how strong I really was, and that was something I needed to fix as soon as possible. Looks like a training trip may be in order after I settle a few things in Jura. Man, I'm probably going to get my head chewed off by the princess and purple-haired ogress if I leave so soon after coming back. But I needed to know my limits in order to fight effectively. Oh well, there are still plenty of other things that needed to be done before I could even consider leaving to train, like making sure the goblin village was self-sufficient, visiting the Dryad territory, maybe visiting a few of the other monster settlements in Jura, and going back to the ogre village. Haha, so modest. I hope that we work together for a long time, Rimuru. I can tell we're going to be great friends, Kaijin said as raised his cup, grabbing my own with my small dragon hands. I also raised it. Same here. With that, we both chugged the alcohol down to the last drop. In this moment, it just felt good to be alive. Before looking down at my cup and noting that it was empty once more, "Can I get another refill, please?" I called out to the bartending elf. "Oh hey, Mr. Dragon." A few minutes later, the dark elf seated next to Kaijin and across me suddenly called out, catching my attention. Yeah, what's up? Would you like to try something special? The way she said that last word instantly caught my attention. It's a rare talent of mine, and many people in town have said that I'm the best at it. As I turned towards the dark elf, only to see a crystal ball in her hands, fortune telling, what kind of things can you see with that? I asked, genuinely curious. Well, let's see anything really. The dark elf responded with a smile. She must be really confident in her abilities. Still, though, the fact that she could see anything meant I could more or less ask anything, within a certain moral bound, of course. I closed my eyes, though. What would I want to see? When will my mother be revived? Or maybe the state of Jura in a decade or so. Heck, maybe even something to do with my love life. I know. Why don't you check who he's destined to be with? The green-eyed elf suddenly declared, almost as though she had been reading my mind. Her sudden declaration caused a chatter on the table to immediately cease as everyone turned to our direction, their curiosities clearly piqued by the topic of my love life. Nosy bastards, the lot of you. That's a great idea. I can do that, the dark elf proudly declared, bringing my attention back to her again. Well, I suppose it would be rude to chase them out or something of the sort. Not that I'd been considering it. I wouldn't deny that I was also curious about the possibility of a soulmate of mine being out there. After all, I wanted things that any normal man would want. A wife to come home to and children of my own someday. While it may seem like it's too soon to think about such stuff, given my childlike human form and infant dragon body, I often reminded myself that I was above 40 years in mentality. For monsters that may not mean much given their long lifespans, but for someone who was once human, that was old enough to experience a lot. All right then, here goes. The dark elf called out as she began to wave her hands above the crystal ball she had put in her lap. I felt a small amount of magic leave her and enter the ball as she did so. Ah, I see something, she called out as all eyes focused on the ball. The image swirled for a bit like tides of water sloshing around within the thing, but eventually it cleared up. 6 figures were shown within the orb, 1 woman and 5 children, all of them with rather somber expressions on their faces. I couldn't help but quickly notice that some of them looked Japanese, especially the adult woman, whilst one of the kids looked to be English. Were they all otherworlders like me? The vision went on to focus on the Japanese woman for a few more seconds, signifying that she had been the person of interest within it, the one who was supposed to be my soulmate. She was indeed beautiful, and she looked kind and gentle too, if the way she was interacting with those kids was any indication. Had it been my old life, I doubt I would have been able to approach her. Now, that is a beautiful lady. Kaijin suddenly spoke up, pulling me out of the trance I'd entered as I soaked up as much detail as I could about my destined one. Oh, Rimuru, are you Perdash? The dark elf, who'd been perhaps about to tease me, was suddenly drawn towards the crystal ball once more when another vision began to surface. What's this? It was clear that she was surprised, but her lack of alarm and concern assured me it was nothing to worry about, so probably just something unusual. When the next vision cleared up, it showed many women standing together, all facing towards this way. Most of them were blurry and unidentifiable, but one could make out things like hair color and eye color, and perhaps even clothing. I could count at least 15 or so women, 6 of which were fully visible. The first person I immediately noticed was Trainee. Her glowing spiritual body, vibrant green hair and eyes, and the 2 vines that went around her body were unmistakable. Next to her were 2 Oni-like monsters that greatly resembled the princess and the purple-haired ogres from the ogre village, with some minor differences, the main difference being they looked more human skin-wise, their bodies less bulkier and more slim than before. The princess look-alike was slightly taller, more grown and feminine, almost as though she were a young adult of 19 to 20 years, compared to the current princess, who passed as a 16-year-old by human standards. Her horns narrower and sharper than they previously were. All in all, she looked more beautiful and refined. As for the purple-haired ogress, she looked a lot less wild and far more refined and elegant in this image than she did at the moment. Her narrowed and slimmed-out body, her facial expression, seemed to have an almost childlike innocence to it, though I knew that was just her carefree attitude to almost everything. The next three I didn't know personally. The fourth girl was a fish girl of some kind. Alluring and beautiful was not enough to describe her. Exotic red hair, hypnotic green eyes, patches of soft shimmering blue scales on various parts of her skin, webbed hands, and fish ears. All in all, she was a beauty. She sort of reminded me of a fairy tale mermaid, but without the fishtail. The fifth girl was one with short black hair and cold violet eyes. She wore a metal breastplate and a white cloak over it. Strapped to her waist was a sword, thinner than most, so most likely a rapier of some kind. She seemed like the type who could fight, a seasoned warrior, but clearly human. She also seemed to be Japanese, judging from her facial features. Another otherworlder? And lastly was a young elf woman. She was indeed beautiful like most would expect of her species. Blue-silver hair that went down past her cheeks and jade-green eyes. She had a somewhat mischievous and calculating grin. I could tell from first glance that she was trouble. The other several figures in the crystal were too blurry to make out. For what reason, I wasn't quite sure. Though I could definitely tell that they were humanoid in shape and feminine too. What this all meant was beyond me, though I had a few guesses. Well, isn't this interesting? The dark elf spoke up as she looked up from the crystal ball towards me with a mischievous grin that filled me with dread. Turns out Rimuru's love life is far more interesting than we initially thought. What do you mean? Is my destined one among the girls that just appeared? I asked. Everyone else seemed just as interested in the response. Well, that's not entirely it. How do I put this? The dark elf deliberately dragged on just to lift the suspense. The playful glare I sent her way caused her to giggle. All right. I guess the best answer would be that they're all you destined ones. The collective cry of everyone on the table, myself included, seemed to surprise the dark elf as she jumped a little. Well, wait, you don't actually mean? That's exactly it. It turns out you may have more than one partner in your life, Rimuru, though I am rather surprised by the large number of women that will be in your life. The dark elf teased. A harem? There's no way, right? This isn't a typical ice guy, where the MC gets reborn with OP powers and unknowingly makes a large number of girls fall for him. I tried to deny as I rapidly shook my head sideways. I couldn't get one girlfriend in my previous life, just one, and now here you're telling me I might just have many partners. This was just crazy and maybe a bit unfair to my old self. Kaijin's boisterous laugh pulled me out of my thoughts. You're one lucky man, Rimuru, though maybe a bit greedy too, taking all those beautiful women for yourself. Hey, I'll have you know, I don't have any women yet. I called out defiantly. Oh, so you and Lady Trainee aren't involved? I assumed it was so after I saw her within the crystal. Rigor admitted sheepishly. Oh, are you already familiar with some of those ladies, Rimuru? Kaijin asked teasingly. I only recognized 3 of them, but I'm not involved with any of them. I quickly emphasized before they could get any ideas. I wouldn't deny that there was probably something there for the princess and purple-haired ogress, but I hadn't really thought about it as romantic feelings or whatever. But now, still though, who would have thought one of your future brides would be none other than Hinata Sakaguchi? Kaijin said, his expression surprisingly turning serious as everyone else on the table actually looked concerned. Given the name, it was easy to conclude that this person was Japanese, and of the women shown from the crystal, only 2 of them fit the description. The first being the lady who had been with the kids, and the second being the only visible human girl in the crowd of women earlier. I know, right? Given her reputation and status, you'd think she wouldn't want to be involved with monsters at all. Wonder what the Western Holy Church would think. Garm spoke up. I was instantly concerned when he mentioned something about a church. Being ex-Special Forces, I didn't really have good memories of anything religious. And, if memory called, churches were usually associated with some kind of holy or pure magic which was super effective against monsters, which meant I potentially had a natural enemy already, even if I hadn't known it yet. The fact that this Hinata girl may be from there was bound to be problematic. Oh well, no point worrying about it right now. That would be future me's problem. Not only that, but the elf lady that appeared in that image wasn't that. The green-eyed elf spoke up as she turned towards the honey-blonde elf next to us. Said elf nodded her head in confirmation, meaning they both knew who the elf lady shown in the crystal was. Turning to the other elves on the table, I could tell they all knew who she was. "Are you going to clue us in?" I asked after a few seconds had passed. "Sorry, but we can't do that." The lavender-dressed mature elf responded with a smile. "Besides, isn't it more exciting if you figure out who she is for yourself?" She added as she clasped her hands in front of her. I wanted to say no, that she might as well just tell me now since I'd had my share of surprises. But I quickly realized that if they wanted to tell me, then they would have done so already. I sensed no ill intent, so whoever this elf was must not be someone they feel is a danger to me, or at least they don't believe she would do me harm. I guess so. I relented with a sigh. Now that I think about it, one of the younger elves on the table suddenly spoke up. "I've heard that it's not all that uncommon for male dragons to claim multiple lovers and spouses, especially those that are sentient and powerful enough to transform into human form." She said out loud. "Oh, Rimuru." Garm suddenly called out with a mischievous grin on his face. "I'm pretty sure you have a human form yourself, don't you?" He called out, my left eyebrow twitching in minor annoyance at his teasing. Haven't I been humiliated enough for one day? "Oh yeah, and despite the young body, he has quite the looks." Dor joined in seeing where his brother was taking this. "I bet given time he'll be quite the looker." "Ha ha, given all that, it's no wonder he'll amass such a large number of gorgeous women," Kaijin said as he downed another cup of wine. I couldn't help but grumble incoherent words as I turned away from everyone. There was a reason I'd chosen to come in here in my current form. If they revealed I had a human form, the elves may not feel as comfortable with the rather generous amount of physical contact they've been giving me. If these dwarves ruined this for me, I wouldn't worry about it too much. The dark elf spoke up with a reassuring smile. "No future is set in stone. Fortune-telling just shows one of many possible outcomes. The women shown could all be your destined ones, but in the end you may end up with only a few or one of them, or maybe all or none. It's all on you now," she explained. I took in those words and soaked them up as much as I could. That's right, I was in charge of my own future. The thought of having so many women wasn't something I was against. It had just been an unexpected revelation. Still, I would rather meet these people personally and get to know them before concluding that they were people I'd like to settle down with. My mind, now isn't this an interesting sight? A new voice suddenly declared. Turning to my right, I saw a man wearing a white cloak held together by two golden brooches. Underneath, that he wore a dark brown coat and white shirt. "Oh great, if it isn't Minister Vesta," Kaijin grumbled, his mood clearly ruined by the presence of this man. It took a second to connect the dots, but I quickly realized that this was the man responsible for Kaijin more or less losing his job due to the license revoking terms of delivering those magisteel swords. "To be honest, I'm surprised to see you here, Kaijin. I wasn't sure you could afford such luxuries anymore, given your situation," Vesta said arrogantly as he came closer to our table. This guy was giving me bad vibes through and through. I just wanted him as far away from me as possible, but I was also curious to see how this would go. "You know, I recently received word that you had to beg some foreign magen to heal those crippled henchmen of yours. Now I see there was merit to those words." He taunted as he cast a glance towards the three dwarf brothers. I could sense the rage building up on all four dwarves at that, but aside from a tightened fists and minor glares their expressions were schooled. "I wonder what you had to trade in exchange for such a grand favor. You're already a failure and disgrace who isn't allowed to craft weapons within Dworgen's borders, and I doubt you had the money to actually pay for said treatment. So pray tell Kaijin, to what devil did you sell your soul?" Wow, this guy was really laying the asshole attitude real thick. I could tell that Kane desperately wanted to sock the guy. He not only insulted him, but the dwarf brothers and myself as well. That he hadn't stood up and done so was a testament to his self-control. I doubt I would have been able to do the same. Then again, I most likely would have flared my aura or something, or maybe not, wouldn't want to spook the pretty elves after all. What does it matter to you, Vesta? They're all healed up and better than ever. That's all that matters to me, Kaijin said as he closed his eyes in annoyance and took a sip from his cup before looking back at the minister with a cheeky smirk. And as far as jobs go, the four of us are actually set. We found work outside of Dworgen, where I can continue my work with even greater materials and far better pay than what I had here. And it's thanks to Rimuru here, Kaijin said as he raised his glass to me, prompting me to do the same. I'm a lucky one, really. I came to Dworgen looking for artisans for the town I'm building, and everyone in town referred to Kaijin as the best blacksmith that Dworgen had to offer, with some mentioning the talents of the three brothers that worked closely with him. Their talents stand out, which says a lot given that Dworgen is a nation well known for its craftsmanship. I said. The minister looked shocked to see me speaking up, whether that was because of my current form or something else I didn't care. He also seemed to be getting annoyed at the generous amount of praise I was giving the dwarves, which was the effect I had been aiming for. This guy was a classic asshole with a vendetta against Kaijin. I was going to rub salt in the wound a bit more just for the kicks of it. So naturally, when I met Kaijin and he informed me of his circumstances, I had to pitch in and help. Their lives were negatively impacted whilst in service of Dworgen, and in the end, they were more or less left to themselves. I admit that I may have leveraged his situation, but the results made everyone happy. Kaijin gets to continue his works as a blacksmith, getting to work with better materials than are available here, and a much greater salary. Same with the dwarf brothers. Considering that the town I'm building is from the ground up, they'll really get the chance to show their talents. Said payment will be coming in the form of 2 large 100% magisteel ores every 4 years, which I heard is very valuable here in Dworgen. And Kaijin will even be working with such materials regularly. I told the shitty minister maybe a bit too proudly, but I really wanted to rub in his face the fact that all his actions had simply put Kaijin and the dwarf brothers in a much better position than they had been in before. Both Vesta and the elf ladies gasped at the last part, showing various amounts of shock and surprise. Oops, maybe I should have held the details of my magisteel reserves to myself for a bit longer. Oh well, what's done is done. No use crying over it now. It seemed even Great Sage wasn't pleased with my slip-up. That's not possible. You expect me to believe that such a lowly creature, an infant dragon, has access to 100% magisteel in large quantities? Don't take me for a fool, Vesta exclaimed in denial. I wasn't sure whether he really was denying it because I was a monster or because Kaijin and the others would be the ones benefiting from the valuable ores. Still, though, it was a somewhat pitiful sight. Believe what you want, Minister, but that is the truth of the matter. I even gave Kaijin a few ingots of pure magisteel as proof, and so I could get some local currency. I countered, to which Kaijin nodded his head in confirmation. This only served to upset the minister more as he began to sneer. Not a very good look on him, by the way. Anyways, we came here to celebrate our business agreement and the recovery of the 3 brothers. So I would appreciate it if you would just kindly leave us. It was probably too late to try the diplomatic route, especially after the jabs that had been thrown around. But I honestly wanted to go back to drinking and enjoying some pretty elf company. Spending the rest of the night dealing with this guy was a big no on my plans. So this is what the renowned Kaijin and company have been reduced to, Vesta said with a dramatic sigh of disappointment. The eyes of the dwarves, and I narrowed slightly at that. To think you would sell out your own country just for more money and a prestigious job? To make matters worse, you're entering the services of a monster, a pathetic baby dragon no less. Are you truly that desperate to craft weapons again, Kaijin? Okay, this guy is just asking for an ass whooping. For a split second, my control over my aura and magicules almost slipped due to the anger I felt, but I managed to rein it in. I wasn't the only one angry, though, if the way Kaijin had suddenly stood up was any indication, slamming his hands loudly on the table and shocking a few of the elves. Rigger also seemed ready to jump into action, but a single glare his way was enough to keep him seated. You better watch it, Vesta. I won't stand here and let you insult Rimuru any further after everything he's done for us, Kaijin said as he pointed his hand aggressively at the minister. Vesta only smirked at this. I knew that he was going to leverage that angle to get under the blacksmith's skin. With guys like these, it was best to give them as little ammo as possible, but Kaijin had just given him an angle to attack by taking offense to the insult at me. Vesta turned towards the lavender-dressed elf who was by the counter and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is a nice place you have here, a high-class establishment, no doubt. What I can't understand is why you would allow monsters here and serve them as though they were any other guest," the minister said as he cast disgusted glances towards Rigger and I. "While they are monsters, one is just a baby dragon and the other a hobgoblin, and as you can see, they aren't causing any trouble." The elf responded as she tried to reassure him, though I could tell it wasn't going to work. This guy was looking for a fight, or at least a verbal one. He'd straight up lose in a physical situation. "And yet you acknowledge that they are in fact monsters, or are you implying their behavior suggests otherwise?" Vesta asked, expectedly not letting the situation go. The way he made the pretty elf lady get all nervous ticked me off too. The number of reasons for me to just kick this guy's ass regardless of his status just kept on rising the more he talked. "And no, please, Minister Vesta, let's just calm down and enjoy ourselves," the elf said as she went under the counter and brought Vesta a cup of wine. "Here, please take this drink, it's on the house," she said as she held out the cup for him to take. Vesta didn't look the least bit pleased by her peace offering. Instead, he looked at the cup before glancing my way, a cruel smirk appearing on his face as he snatched the cup. "Here, let me show you what I'll do with your drink," he said as he swiftly walked towards me. My thought acceleration activated right as he began to tilt the cup right above my head. I'd long since sensed his ill intentions through desire and knew he would try something like this. Jumping out of the way was definitely not an option, as that would leave the green-dressed elf whose legs I was on to take the full brunt of the wine from this bastard, meaning there was only one option. "Predator," I mentally called out as I looked straight up at the incoming liquid. Time resumed normally as a small black vortex of magicules appeared right above my mouth, absorbing all the liquid before it could touch me or the elf lady with me. What the dash? Vesta, too shocked to say anything, took a few steps back. "Lord Rimuru, are you okay?" Rigger asked, both in concern and shock. "I'm more than fine," I reassured, before turning towards the green-dressed elf. "Are you okay? I hope he didn't get anything on you. I'd be kicking his ass regardless if he messed up her clothing." "No, I'm all good thanks to you. That was really cool," she responded as she pulled me into a hug, giving me another taste of Hooter heaven. Man, that seriously pissed me off. Still though, the guy is a minister. In the end, no harm was done, so best not to get in any unnecessary trouble. I told myself as I tried to calm down. Besides, we'll be gone by tomorrow morning, probably won't see this dusha bag for a long time afterwards. Repeating that a few times to myself, I was able to calm down and keep myself from doing anything rash. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for Kaijin. Vesta, the blacksmith dwarf, was standing in front of the minister before I could even properly process what was going on. His fist, which was reared back, was quickly thrown forward, connecting with Vesta's face with a surprisingly heavy impact. The minister was pushed back a couple of steps from a strike. Several gasps filled the elf club, from the elves, the dwarf brothers, and even the attendant who had apparently come with Vesta were all surprised to see that someone actually had the audacity to strike Vesta in public and in front of so many witnesses, given his status. As for me, I was impressed, jealous, and mildly concerned. I wish I'd been the one to actually sock the jackass, but I had a feeling that for Kaijin, it was a lot more personal than just the events that had transpired tonight, so I was willing to let him have this one. "Why, you brute? Do you know who I am?" Vesta cried in shock as he held the rapidly swelling bruise on his right cheek. "Just shut up already. Haven't you already done enough? Setting me up for the failure of the Magisteel Soldier Project, giving me an impossible order just so my license would be revoked, the same order that resulted in 3 of my closest friends being bedridden. And now you're mocking all the suffering we went through these last few months because of you. You really are an asshole, Vesta," Kaijin shouted, venting his frustrations as he threw yet another punch and connected with Vesta's other cheek, pushing him back another few steps. By this point, Vesta was every bit the coward I had imagined him to be. Despite being taller, he made no effort to even protect himself. I doubt he even knew how. As much as I wanted to see the guy get beat up some more, I knew that heavy injuries would only land Kaijin in more trouble. Kaijin, aim for the body, not the face. I called out. Body wounds were far less visible to others. However, my words seemed to fall on deaf ears as Kaijin's next punch connected with Vesta's nose, and a sickening crunch sound was heard. Yet that nose was definitely broken. The force of the blow pushed Vesta into his attendant, and both of them were knocked onto the ground, with the former being unconscious. We all watched in silence at the scene that had unfolded in front of us. Kaijin must have had a lot of pent-up anger if he broke the guy's nose. Still, though, this was bound to get him into a lot of trouble, so it was best I do something to at least cover our hides a little bit. With that in mind, I hopped off the elf lady's legs, much to my internal disappointment, and transformed into my human form. Within a second, I stood as an adolescent child within the elf bar, earning multiple gasps and whispers from the elves themselves. Though for the moment, I paid them no mind as I walked up to Kaijin. Kaijin, are you sure that was wise? He is a minister, after all. I asked as I looked at the down minister. His face was already getting all swollen, and his nose bleeding and clearly bent in a direction it wasn't meant to face. Kaijin really didn't hold anything back, huh? Probably not, but he had it coming. After everything he put me through and the insults he threw around tonight, he actually deserves a lot more than this. Kaijin said unrepentantly, clearly not apologetic for his actions. Not that I could blame him for feeling the way he felt. Okay then, but still you broke the guy's nose. That's bound to land us in some serious trouble. I said, as much as I didn't want to, it would probably be a good idea if I healed him. Though it still sucked that I had to waste my valuable potions on this jackass. Notice, in-depth analysis of the full potion and hypocute herbs has been completed. You have successfully acquired the magic art, Greater Heal. Perfect timing as usual, great sage. Though when did you start analyzing those? I didn't remember asking it to do anything like that. Not that I was complaining. I could certainly see the value of having healing magic. It meant I could now also heal others myself in the event that magic potions were unavailable. Answer. Analysis began after the successful operation of the three dwarf brothers. Use of healing magic would have been more efficient than potions. Good to know. I acknowledged with a hum. If this spell really was based on the full potions and hypocute herbs, that meant it was just as effective, if not more so. I shook my head sideways and returned to the task at hand, healing the jackass of a minister. Greater Heal, I called out as I stretched my hand toward the minister, releasing a wave of green energy that washed over Vesta. Within seconds, the swelling on his face was gone and his nose was back in place. This way, even if the guy does charge us with assault, it won't be as bad as it would have been if the injuries were still there. You're too kind, Rimuru, Kaijin said with a sigh as he shook his head sideways, though the smile on his face made it clear that he wasn't really upset about me healing Vesta. No, I'm not. I'd just rather not face heavy punishment for a guy like Vesta. It's just not worth it. I responded, leaving things as they would most definitely have resulted in more than just a fine. Especially with the number of witnesses present, at least this way there would be room for us to wiggle our way out of. A few moments later, our group stood outside in shackles as the still unconscious Vesta was carried on a stretcher. We were all put into a holding cell for the night, with the prison guard telling us that we'd be facing trial tomorrow. This was not how I imagined the night ending. Drunk, maybe, but stuck in a prison cell whilst completely. Well, it sucked, but at least I enjoyed the time I'd spent at that elf establishment and had even learned a few things about my possible future. The following morning came by faster than I thought. I'd reverted back to my dragon form for a more comfortable sleeping position on the floor, meaning I didn't face the level of discomfort that the others had felt. It wasn't long before the palace guards came to get us, and we were taken to the palace to stand trial. I debated turning into my human form, but decided against it since Vesta had only seen me in that form and had most likely mentioned my true form, so there was no point hiding it. The dwarves and Rigger were all chained together in shackles, whilst the guards put a collar around my neck. Now that pissed me off. I wasn't some tame beast. I was a fucking dragon. Even though every fiber of my body was screaming to tear this damn thing off, I just barely managed to contain myself. When we arrived at the castle, I immediately took note of all the armed knights that stood along the court walls. I also took note of the person that would be defending us. The guy was giving off vibes that were shady as hell. I wouldn't trust this guy with my life, which unfortunately is the situation I found myself in. More than that, however, I was surprised by the mere sight of Vesta. The guy looked like a glorified mummy. The guy had many bandages wrapped around the upper parts of his body. One long one around his forehead, a bandage on both cheeks, and a small one on his nose. Heck, his right arm was in a sling of all things. Oh boy, all of a sudden, I'm not feeling very confident about this trial. I thought with a frown. I should have considered the fact that Vesta would play dirty and do something like this. It was a lack of foresight on my part. Still though, just how much does this guy want to screw us over? Kaijin had given a summarized version of his history with Vesta. Their time together in the military, the Magisteel Soldier Project, and Vesta making Kaijin take the blame for its failure. It was clear this guy was jealous of Kaijin. For what reason, it didn't matter. But that vendetta ran deep, and Vesta likely wouldn't stop until Kaijin was 6 feet under or something. I hated these types of bullies, the kind who wanted to watch their victims suffer for an eternity without any moment of peace or joy. His Majesty, Gazel Dwargo, will now enter. One of the knights shouted. Immediately, everyone stood up straight and at attention before they went down on one knee. Rigger was a little lost for a second before, just doing what everyone else was doing, I merely lowered my head slightly. I could afford to show respect to the king of the nation at least. The loud sound of footsteps echoed in the courtroom before the source of it all made an appearance. The king was a large, muscular dude of dark skin color. He wore armor plating that made him look even bigger and more intimidating. His expression and composure certainly didn't give off friendly vibes either. This guy wasn't here to joke around, though what would one expect from the king of a whole nation? Still, to think that the king would be the one that's presiding over our case, I don't know if I should be more concerned or not. With Vesta as a member of his royal court, it may make him more inclined to believe the minister. With that, the trial began. Dwargen laws explicitly stated that nobody was allowed to speak within the court without the king's permission, hence the reason for our defendant. Unfortunately, the guy seems to be in Vesta's pocket. He did nothing to defend our case, which was his actual job, and instead portrayed us as the villains who disturbed Vesta whilst he was drinking within the establishment. Looks like he's been bought, though I can't say I'm surprised. Kaijin whispered lowly. This sucks balls. If we can't even speak, how do we defend ourselves in such cases? I wondered I wasn't going to go to prison for a lie. I'd sooner fight my way out of this place. And is that the whole truth? The judge asked our defendant. Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. He responded naturally with a bow. He'd spun that web of lies perfectly and didn't give away anything. This guy had obviously done this kind of shady business before. King Gazel, Vesta called out as he took a few steps forward before going down on one knee. Having heard this testimony, I ask that you pass your strictest judgment upon these hooligans. He requested as he gestured towards all of us. I couldn't help the way my eyebrow twitched in annoyance. If I had to fight my way out, that guy was going to be the first to die, I swear. The king watched the proceedings without a word. I could feel him carefully eyeing all of us. We have reached a verdict. First of all, Kaijin, the main offender, you will be sentenced to 20 years in the mines. The judge called out, damn, this wasn't looking good. And next, his accomplices, they will serve 10 years. That is all. The court is now adjourned. Oh, hell no. We were totally busting out of here the moment an opportunity rose. I wasn't going to spend the next 10 years of my new life doing forced labor. Wait. The deep voice of the king suddenly called out, causing all to stop and pay attention. Kaijin, It's been some time. How have you been doing? The king asked. Did Kaijin know the king personally? He hadn't mentioned that. There may still be a way out of this, after all. I've been doing as well as I could be given the circumstances, my king, Kaijin said as he quickly got down on one knee. Was that guilt I felt from the king? Desire let me feel his emotions, but his face was so schooled, I wouldn't have been able to tell he felt that way without it. Kaijin, would you be interested in returning to my ranks? Oh, now, this was an interesting development. Did the king want Kaijin back as a blacksmith or as a knight? I wasn't sure, but I couldn't help but wonder what Kaijin himself would do. Seeing Vesta get shocked and jealous was also amusing to see. This was the chance for Kaijin to regain the reputation that he had lost as a result of losing his license. Not to mention the request was coming from the king himself. I could feel the internal conflict within the blacksmith as he thought it over for a few seconds before coming to a swift choice. While it would be an honor to serve you once again, my king, I'm afraid I have already sworn my service and loyalty to another, Kaijin said as he raised his head to meet the king's eye. My word and my oath are the greatest treasures I own, and that's why I could never forsake them, even if you ordered me to do so. Such insolence! One of the knights next to the king shouted, the ones on the ground all pointing their weapons at Kaijin. The king and Kaijin still remained in eye contact. I see. Very well then, the king said after a few seconds before lifting his hand, signaling the knights to put away their weapons. The king then turned his eyes towards me. I took some time to look into this case due to some rumors I heard about the Magen involved. Vesta, remove your bandages, the king ordered as he stood up from his seat and turned towards the minister with a glare. Pardon? The guy was just as confused as we all were. This was not the way I expected things to go. I'd like to see the extent of your injuries for myself. The bandages on your head and face should be enough, the king said impatiently. Holy shit, the dude knows. The king clearly knew that Vesta had been trying to play the court in him. He said he had looked into the case. More than likely he asked someone he trusted to do it. Maybe they asked the elf ladies at the establishment what had happened. That was the only possible answer to all this. They had been there when I healed Vesta's wounds, and if the king knew about that, then that meant he also knew that Vesta's bandages were just for show and dramatic purposes. Well, Vesta, Gazel asked impatiently as he cast a glare towards the now shaking minister. There was no way out of this for the bastard, and if he took too long, the guards were more likely to tear off those bandages themselves. And my king, for what reason coup? Are you questioning my orders, Vesta? Gazel asked with a glare, his soldiers tightening their grips on their weapons. At this point, I almost felt sorry for Vesta, almost. The guy was shaking like a leaf, visible for all to see. If they hadn't known he was lying before, then they definitely knew now. And no, sir, Vesta responded as he shakily reached for the bandage wrapped around his head and began to unwrap it. Once unraveled, he let the bandage fall to the ground, revealing his unharmed forehead. The guy couldn't even bring himself to look up as he undid the bandages on his nose and cheeks, shamefully looking down with tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. I wasn't moved. Besides, after everything he had done, I wouldn't take pity on this guy. Well, Vesta, do you have anything to say for yourself? King Gazel asked the unharmed minister scrutinizingly. Vesta, too ashamed, couldn't even look up at the king. No, sir, I have nothing to say, he mumbled, looking like a broken man. I could tell that Kaijin was feeling a certain amount of pity for the man. Turns out he's actually the kind one and not me. Very well then, I shall pass my judgment, King Gazel said, voice raised to address all present. I hereby renounce the punishment of Kaijin and his companions. As for Vesta, for attempting to deceive this court, I shall strip you of your status and rank with immediate effect. You are to never show yourself to me again. Court adjourned. And that was how the trial came to an end. I honestly thought that Vesta was let off a bit too easily, but all things considered, I'm fine with whatever punishment as long as we're not in any trouble. Surprisingly, the king asked us to stay behind after the trial, and the 6 of us were taken to a waiting room. I had a few ideas as to what he could want, judging by what he had said about looking into me during the trial. I suppose I had made bigger waves than I initially thought with the restoration of the Dwarf Brothers, and he might have caught wind of the fact that I had access to large amounts of 100% Magisteel since I mentioned that in the Elf Bar. Could that also have played a part in getting out of these trials? I wasn't sure, but I guess I wasn't against coming to some sort of agreement with him if he wanted my valuable items. It would probably be a good idea to start building some alliances for future purposes. The Forest of Jura wouldn't be as strong and terrifying to the surrounding populace without my mother, and only those within its borders knew of my existence. At this point, it was crucial to come together and build as many connections as possible. But there was no hurry. Only foolish people run into agreements without getting a proper measurement of the individual they're dealing with. King Gazel may have seemed pretty cool in the courts, but one action does not reflect his true nature. That is something that I hope to get a deeper insight to with this meeting. I was pulled from my thoughts when the door was knocked on twice before opening, and in came a middle-aged man with light blonde hair, thick eyebrows, and a sharp nose. He wore standard knight's armor. "Thank you for your patience. The king will see you now," the man said before gesturing for us to follow him. So we did just that, though I did switch into my human form before leaving. It just felt more proper to have an audience with the king of a nation in this form rather than speaking to him whilst in dragon form. Along the way, Kaijin informed me that this man was one of the king's most trusted soldiers and that his name was Dwarf. I filed that information for later. We were eventually taken to a rather nice and well-decorated room. Within it, the hero king of the dwarves stood by the windows at the opposing end of the room, looking out into the city. Dwarf announced our presence before King Gazel turned towards us, his eyes quickly settling on me. "So, you're the mage in possession of those valuable Magisteel." The king opened. As I thought, this was the main reason he had asked to speak with me. "Yes, well, I took as many as I could, mainly as a bargaining chip since we monsters don't really have any money for trading. It wasn't until recently that I learned their actual value in craftsmanship. A small lie at the end. Then again, it was easy to believe considering that monsters mainly used barter trade as a means to get what they want. And may I ask where you got them from?" The hero king asked with a minor glare. An attempt at intimidation? Well, that wasn't going to work on me, but I had no qualms with sharing the location. "I got them from my place of birth, the cave of the storm dragon Viridia." The atmosphere in the room suddenly changed as all but Rigor suddenly looked at me in shock and surprise. To be honest, it completely slipped my mind that I hadn't told the dwarves my heritage. Guess I just gotten that friendly with them after everything. It was a short while after my birth, give or take 3 months ago. I found tons of magic ores and hippocute herbs in the cave and took as many of them with me as I could. I explained with a shrug of my shoulder, as if it was nothing at all, choosing to play it cool. That claim is a little ridiculous. The Storm Dragon's most well-known magical offshoot would be Charybdis, and your level of intelligence suggests you're nothing like any of the other offshoots of the Storm Dragon. Gazel said as he narrowed his eyes at me, "But your aura and magic, tries you may to suppress and hide them, do feel eerily similar to that of the Storm Dragon. So much so that it's rather uncanny." Well, shit, this guy was onto me. I suppose I had stopped hiding at the moment I told him I was born in the Seal Cave. Yes, as I mentioned to Kaijin and the Dwarf Brothers, I am the elemental dragon known as Rimuru Tempest, I said before pausing for dramatic effect for a few seconds. But what I didn't mention is that I am the son and true heir of the Storm Dragon, Viridia Tempest herself, born of her flesh and blood, not a magic offshoot. I went on to reveal. Everyone except Rigor was deeply shocked at the revelation. My mother had quite the reputation across the lands as the infamous evil dragon, notorious for her destructive rampages. So for them to suddenly get news of her having an offspring must be very worrying indeed. And unlike the powerful monsters simply born of her magicules, I was her direct offspring, granting me power, potential, and intelligence far exceeding any of them. So they would naturally be wary of me. "Wait, Rimuru, are you being serious right now?" Kaijin asked, breaking into the conversation. The guy had a bead of sweat rolling down the left side of his head. Yeah, it's the truth. Sorry I didn't mention it earlier, but I was hoping to keep my existence quiet for a little while longer. I said as I rubbed the back of my head sheepishly. The Jura forest is in a rather fragile state at the moment since the disappearance of my mother, and news of my existence would only bring trouble from those who'd view me as a potential threat due to my mother's destructive tendencies. Sheesh, that's a lot to process though, Rimuru. Son of the Storm Dragon. Talk about high-class employers. Kaijin muttered as he shook his head sideways while stepping back. I turned back to the hero king who seemed to have been deep thought, yet keenly aware of his surroundings. He was probably thinking about how the rest of this talk would affect things like relations and his kingdom in general. I would flare my aura a bit to prove myself, but doing so would more than likely cause the people in this building mass panic. I added, King Gazel had already said something about being about to partially see through my hide form technique, which I had been using to mask my aura, meaning he knew I was stronger than I claimed to be, just not how strong. That won't be necessary. Nobody would be foolish enough to use the name of the Storm Dragon so casually, let alone claiming to be her direct offspring. King Gazel said with a sigh, before looking at me straight in the eye. I do have one question, however. Rimuru Tempest, what are your intentions? As my mother's heir and the current lord and guardian of the forest, my primary concern is protecting the great forest of Jura and all of its inhabitants, along with improving the lives of all the sentient monsters who call home, or at least those who will follow me, as opposed to picking fights with other nations or conquering others. While I love my mother, I don't agree with her history of destructive behavior. I said, with my mother currently gone, tensions will undoubtedly rise, and the nations that border the forest, including the Demon Lord territories and the surrounding human nations, are potentially likely to make power plays in the future, and I wish to be ready to defend our home if it comes down to that. I'd rather not fight, but I'd be a fool to expect others not to capitalize on my mother's disappearance. I explained, making sure to point out that I had no ill intentions. I see, King Gazel said as he closed his eyes in thought. Regarding the Storm Dragon Viridia, your mother, would you happen to know the cause of her disappearance? Unfortunately, no. My egg hatched away from where she was sealed up within the cave, but I did meet and speak with her. She was the one who granted me the name Rimuru, granting me her protection. She told me a bit about this world and what I should expect before telling me to find my way out. By the time I reached the surface of the cave, her aura had vanished. Naturally, I went back down to check, but she was gone. I explained this was the story I had come up with and the one I would be sticking to until the day I released my mother from my stomach. Warning: attempt of mental intrusion by the individual Gazel Dwargo. Repelling attempt. Repelling of a unique skill. Tyrant successful. Analysis of the unique skill. Tyrant successful. Utilizing copy to replicate the sub-skill thought reading. Successful. Thought reading has been acquired. What the heck? There was a lot to unpackage there, but the first thing on the list was the fact that King Gazel had apparently tried to pry into my head. Not cool, man, not cool. King Gazel, while I understand your desire for answers, I'd rather you not resort to mental intrusion. I said to the shocked king, more than likely surprised that I had managed to block his attempt at reading my mind. He-ya-ha-ha. The guy just started laughing in a way that actually spooked me a little bit. That's the first time somebody has ever detected, let alone blocked the effects of my unique skill. Truly, you are a fascinating creature, Rimuru. Allow me to apologize for prying into your mind, or rather attempting to do so. It's fine. I can understand wanting to be thorough for the sake of your people. I said with a wave of my hand. He didn't get anything from my mind, so there was no use making a big deal out of things. Your goal is an admirable one, Rimuru, and I wish you success in your endeavor. When you've successfully established the foundation of your nation, I hope you'll reach out to me again. Perhaps we could form an alliance. Gazel said with a grin. Whoa, hold on. Who said anything about forming a nation? I was initially shocked by the idea, but then again, the more I thought about it, the more it made sense that he would think so. Not to mention, it may not actually be a bad idea. Considering that we were surrounded on all sides, and without the protection of a true dragon, the most logical course of action was for the different tribes of Jura to band together and form a single nation. They would be far stronger together than they would be individually. The problem was that monsters in general were prideful creatures, and getting them to work together without a powerful figure to lead and control them would be next to impossible. Which brought about the next question. Was I really ready to lead an entire nation? My past life experiences would be of no use to me in such a position. This is different to leading team missions or other military jobs. This would involve lots of politics, and I'd be responsible for millions of lives if all went well. To be honest, I wasn't sure, but the circumstances make the man, right? Are you sure about that? You do realize you're talking about aligning yourself with monsters, right? I asked King Gazel. I wasn't foolish enough to believe that forming a nation of monsters would be enough to deter humans. If anything, they may feel the need to attack sooner before said nation becomes too big a threat. I'm sure. Rimuru, with your heritage and strength, it's only a matter of time until you seize control over the entire forest of Jura. And when you do, you'll have access to wealth and power beyond your wildest dreams. Having someone to back you up would only serve to benefit you. King Gazel said, to which I nodded my head in understanding. Having Dworgen's backing would certainly help with any future relations we may try to build. Please give me some time to think about it. As it stands, I'm trying to build a single goblin village. That's a far cry from the nation you have in mind. I responded, grateful as I wasn't going to rush into things considering I hadn't even thought about building a nation up until he mentioned it. It was a pretty big deal to build a nation of monsters. I wasn't even sure if I'd be able to unify the races of Jura. I'd rather not force anything with brute force. Notice, with your power and heritage as the son and heir of the Storm Dragon, along with the steadfast loyalty of the Dryads, the Hobgoblins, Tempest Wolves, and Ogres as a basis, the odds of succeeding in building a prosperous nation of monsters is approximately 87.3%. The support of the dwarves and their services increases the odds to 96.91%. You make it sound like the ogres are already subordinates of mine or something. It was good to know that I'd have a good foundation, though. Likelihood of ogres submitting to you within a short time span of your return is 98%. Yeah, I figured as much. They respect power and strength, and more than that, they have a great respect for my mother as their guardian and lady. I appreciate the trust and goodwill you are extending to me, King Gazel. I can tell you have the genuine interests of your people at heart as opposed to your own self-interest, and you show a greater deal of open-mindedness than most leaders would show to a leader of monsters, especially given the infamous reputation of my mother. I'll be sure to keep you and your kingdom in mind as a trustworthy and reliable ally if I do decide to form a nation. I told him, as a sign of goodwill in regards to future trade between our nations, I would like you to have these. I pulled out over 100 pounds of large 100% Magisteel ores out of my stomach, along with 5 barrels of full potion. These ores are made of 100% pure, high-grade Magisteel, and within these barrels are full potions capable of healing virtually anything short of death. Those are the ones that I used to heal the dwarf brothers. I said proudly, maybe showing off a little bit as King Gazel, Dwarf, Kaijin, and the dwarf brothers all looked on in shock at the materials that I was just casually handing out. Thank you for this. And about your healing of the dwarf brothers, I actually wanted to ask you about that. King Gazel said, causing me to look at him curiously. To make a long story short, the king was curious about the methods I'd used when healing the 3 brothers. And so I gave him a basic rundown of the surgery, translating what Great Sage told me. Asking for a live demonstration, King Gazel and Dorm took me to an infirmary that held a knight who'd been brought in for this specific reason. Apparently, the guy was a valued soldier during his glory days, but lost his right arm in battle. Still, the king valued him even as an individual, so had continued to keep him within his ranks. They were basically taking advantage of this opportunity for me to heal him while their resident doctors took notes on how I healed and restored his arm using the full potion. The guy's surgery was far less complicated than dealing with the dwarf brothers, something I made sure to tell the doctors, meaning we were done within minutes. Now the guy just needed some sleep to regain the energy used to regrow the new limb. Thank you again for doing this, Rimuru. I'm sure this knowledge will go a long way into improving medical practices. King Gazel said with an appreciative nod after everything was said and done. And with the full potions you left with us, others who were affected by the mine's collapse that crippled the dwarf brothers will also get a chance to get their lives back. No problem, glad I could help out. And thus our trip in Dworgen came to an end. That turned out to be quite the adventure, huh? I muttered. It was now well past noon with the sun starting to make its descent. Looking back, where we came from, I could see the gates of Dworgen not too far away. But everything seemed to have worked out just fine, so there's no need for concern. Kaijin responded with a smile of his own as he looked towards his home. I could tell that he was going to miss this place. Same with the other dwarves. Besides, this is a new chapter in our lives, and I for one can't wait to get started. Then it's time for us to head home. Ranga, come out. I called out, causing the Tempest Wolf leader to come out of my shadow. Rigger doing the same with the Tempest Wolf in his shadow. You call, Master? Ranga eagerly asked. Whoa, Rimuru, you have dire wolves under your command too? Kaijin asked in amazement. They're actually Tempest Wolves, the evolved form of dire wolves. I clarified before looking at Ranga and the other wolf. Can you two give all of us a ride back to the forest? Of course, Master. Ranga responded eagerly as he and the other Tempest Wolf grew to their full sizes in order to better accommodate us. After each wolf took 3 of us, we quickly reunited with the others and subsequently returned to the great forest of Jura, where new journeys would be awaiting us back home. Chapter 12, Settling In. The trip back to the great forest of Jura was as quick as when we left, only taking us a total of 3 days riding on the backs of the Tempest Wolves. Nothing much happened within this time frame, other than getting to know Kaijin and the dwarf brothers a little bit better. I also took the time to explain a few things to them, such as the fact that I wasn't a permanent resident of the city just yet, and that I was currently living within the ogre village in the forest. They took the news better than the goblins did, accepting that I would be leaving after 2 weeks or so when they had settled in, and I was assured that things would continue to progress well. When we had arrived back at the goblin village, I was surprised. I remember telling Rigard to reach out and recruit goblins from other villages who were interested in joining them, swearing allegiance to me in the process, but still I was caught a little off guard by just how many he ended up finding and bringing. There were hundreds of them, maybe even 1,000. Just how had Rigard managed to gather so many of these guys in such a short space of time? Welcome back, Lord Rimuru. Everyone, including the new guests, shouted happily in greeting upon our arrival. Rimuru-sama, Rigard proudly shouted as he stepped forward. We did as you had told us and sought out additional goblin villages who were interested in serving you in exchange for shelter and protection. As you can see, our mission was a great success. No, this was more than just a success. You may actually have overdone it, Rigard. I thought with a sweat drop. I'm pretty sure that I had mentioned it loud and clear that I wanted more goblins so I could even out the numbers between the wolves and goblins. Great Sage, how many goblins am I looking at here? Answer. The estimated number of goblins is roughly 1,000. Damn, that's a lot more than I planned for. I thought as I looked over the small goblin creatures. They looked so small and frail, just as the hobgoblins looked before their own evolution. I could just as easily sense the desperation and fear pouring off them in waves. If I chased and rejected some of them, they would no doubt be preyed upon easily by other powerful creatures within the forest. Besides, they might have been here for a few days now. Chasing them out would be cruel. Oh well, guess I just had to put on my big boy pants and deal with it. After processing my shock, I immediately spoke to Great Sage, seeking my trusty skills counsel. Hey, Great Sage, while I have already named 230 goblins and hundreds of dire wolves, will I be able to name this many goblins without issue? Notice, due to the passive growth from the subskill drainage and the improved efficiency in magicule manipulation, the amount of magicules needed to evolve the goblins into mid-C-ranked hobgoblins has been significantly reduced. Total remaining Magicule reserves after naming all 1,000 goblins is estimated to be 61.31%. While that was reassuring, though I'd probably still name them in groups. The rest I would figure out as we went along. This would bring the total goblin population up to approximately 1,230, with the wolves nearing 500. While not quite the balance I was looking for, it may actually be better this way, considering that the Tempest wolves were of higher rank than the goblins. So in some way it was balanced. Good job, Rigard. I'll admit this is a lot more than I thought you'd achieve before I came back, but regardless, I approve. I said as I gave the goblin lord a thumbs up. Sir, Rigard said as he stood at attention with tears starting to gather in the corner of his eyes. I quickly turned away from the awkward sight of seeing such a jacked goblin on the verge of tears. I'd probably have to work on the goblin's timid nature and inferiority complex. I'd forgotten that these guys had been at the bottom of the food chain all their lives. When I initially made the rule of them not growing overconfident, I never actually considered that their vulnerabilities and inferiority would carry on. These guys glowed at the smallest of praises, quivered like leaves at the slightest of scoldings, and did anything and everything they could to earn my favor. It was beyond just loyalty. This was them still being scared of the world despite their growth. And I had a feeling these new goblins would be much the same once they evolved. I still had time to figure it out, though. I'd do what I could in the 2 weeks I'd stick around. The rest would just have to come with time as their skills and abilities grew. All right, Rigard most likely told you, but my name is Rimuru Tempest, son of the storm dragon Viridia and guardian of the forest. I shouted as I turned towards my new subordinates. I'm pretty sure Rigard has already told you the rules of our little village, correct? Yes, sir. The goblins all responded quickly, most of them a little jumpy. I'm adding one more rule to those 3. I won't be tolerating any lazy folks in this village. Each and every individual will work for the benefit of everyone, be it gathering and growing food, construction, making clothes, and things like security. Everyone will play their part. I said loud enough that everyone could hear, whether they were wolves, goblins, hobgoblins, and even the insectoids Zegan and Apido. In return, those that work will receive food, shelter, clothing, and protection. Naturally, the only ones that aren't bound by this rule are the young and elderly. Did everyone understand that? Yes, Lord Rimuru. We will work hard. Everyone responded. Not too hard. Overworking yourself won't benefit anyone. I quickly reminded them. I had a feeling that I'd actually be reminding them of this point regularly. Monsters were built with more stamina and strength than humans, even creatures like hobgoblins, even if the gap wasn't as huge as, say, humans and ogres. Still, that didn't mean I should overwork them or anything. It would be counterproductive, both health-wise and in terms of morale and mentality. In line with that thought of working hard, I'd like to introduce some new faces. I informed everyone as I gestured towards Kaijin and the 3 dwarf brothers. These are my new friends and subordinates Kaijin, Garm, Dord, and Myrd. They are the finest dwarven blacksmiths and artisans that Dworgen had to offer prior to them joining me. They will be a big help for this growing town in improving housing, clothing, craftsmanship, forging, and overall construction of this town. I want you and the others to treat them as colleagues and welcome them as fellow citizens. I will be allocating some of you to work and learn from them. Their skills will prove invaluable, and having more people with said talents will speed up the overall construction of our town. I informed the goblins particularly this time around. They were the only ones that had the necessary features to learn the craftsmanship of the dwarves. Yes, Lord Rimuru, we deeply appreciate you bringing us such valued support, and are thankful to the dwarves for agreeing to help us. Rigard said proudly. Good. I also brought other valuable necessities from Dworgen, including seeds of certain plants and fruits that can be cultivated to bolster the food supply and medical herbs for need to grow them properly to help ensure a steady supply of food and herbs. Some may not be able to grow properly within the forest due to magicule density, and others may mutate as a result. I warned him it would be a trial and error for most of these plants. If the mutations turned out to be inconsequential for monsters, then good. Otherwise, we'd have to discard harmful plants. As for training, I'll be handling that for the duration that I'm here. I'll create a proper regime and everything. As they were right now, The goblins lacked any form of training and had no fighting instinct. I'd have to start from ground up, basic drills and all that. By the time I left for the ogre village, I had to have a somewhat capable force for things like hunting, patrolling, and local enforcement. I wasn't much of a teacher, so I'd most likely ask the ogre chief if he could spare some of his own to teach the goblins, especially since weapon variety was important. With the goblin numbers now high, that meant I could pair more wolves with them for proper hunting forces too. Days passed after our return. I began the process of naming the goblins the following day and finished within 3 days. That was 2 days ago. All of those goblins had evolved into beautiful and attractive hobgoblins and goblinas much like the others. The goblins were quick to get to work. Rigor took to assigning them to the dwarves so as to learn and maximize their talents. Kaijin took in a few apprentices to work with him in his new blacksmith shop. According to him, they were showing a genuine interest and were making the effort to learn. Weapon and armor crafting was a delicate art and required time and patience to learn, and Kaijin definitely was a patient teacher. Garm was teaching his group of goblins the art of making clothes. Particularly with monster materials such as fur and leather, I definitely planned to ask the ogres if they'd be willing to share their silk and weaving techniques with the goblins as well. That would go a long way into improving quality of life. Dord took to making accessories, something that instantly drew the attention of a couple of goblinas that were drawn by the jewelry. It seemed to be the slowest in terms of progression due to the amount of detail that was required when carving out such small items. Still though, I had a feeling that the effort would be worth it once they got the hang of it. MYRD worked closely with Rigard and a bunch of other goblins in the actual construction of the village itself. Basic wooden housing and other structures were in the process of being built. The layout and everything looked good from the plans they had showed me earlier. As for the farming, we'd planted the seeds, but I wasn't expecting it to yield any results for at least another month or 2 weeks depending on the type of fruit, vegetable, or plant in general. The goblin lords under Rigard had been left in charge of the various areas we'd planted in. These were the previous village chiefs of the goblin villages Rigard had recruited. They had all decided to have Rigard be in charge of all the goblins, basically passing the responsibility on to him. But they did also take some responsibility within the village itself. I told them to keep an eye out for sudden mutations in plants as well as giving them what the expected results should be. I would use Great Sage to analyze any mutated plants to see if they were still edible for monsters. Finally, there was my job. Aside from overseeing everything that was going on, I was the one training the goblins. I'd started out with some basic early morning drills to help them get into the habit of waking up with the sun and conditioning their bodies. I started with the basics of swordsmanship for some, while others took to archery and hand-to-hand. Those were the areas I felt I could be of some help. Other forms of weaponry would have to come later if I could get the ogres to agree with teaching the goblins. The Tempest Wolves also had their own training sessions. For the most part, I kept most of them separated and had Ranga and Raya practice various hunting maneuvers. The Tempest Wolves were stronger and smarter than they were prior to their evolutions, meaning that they were more capable of working together in the field. Another good surprise was the fact that all the Tempest Wolves gained the skill, shadow movement. It's basically teleporting through sinking into and jumping out of shadows. I also acquired that skill through our connection. I had to adjust a bit of their training thanks to that, but it opened up a whole new world of possibilities for the wolves' tactics and strategies. Another aspect I'd wanted to delve into was the elemental affinities. According to Great Sage, all the Tempest Wolves had an affinity for lightning and wind. The males had a primary affinity for lightning and a secondary affinity for wind, while for the female wolves it was reversed. Thus far, only Ranga and Ranko had made some progress in that area, and they were currently trying to get the rest of the pack up there as well. Funny enough, I'd also gained the extra skills, Black Lightning and Black Wind. These 2 extra skills were under my intrinsic skill, Storm Magic. Apparently, the elemental affinities of the Tempest Wolves had been influenced by the chaotic nature of my intrinsic skill, resulting in an evolution of sorts. These 2 skills were far more powerful and dangerous to their original versions as a result. I'd have to make the time to practice those skills. Preferably in a safe and isolated area, away from any populace. Aside from all that, I'd also formed a group called the Goblin Riders. If it wasn't obvious, It's a group of paired goblins and wolves. Currently, they number about 70 pairs. I was having them get to know their partners and practice working together for the time being, outside of their training with respective species. I hope to make this group the local law enforcement of the village, as well as the ones responsible for protecting the village from any powerful monsters. All in all, village production and adaptation were going quite well. It would only be a matter of days before they were more than stable enough for me to leave. Lord Rimuru. I was interrupted from my thoughts by the excited call of none other than Apido, who was flying towards me, with Zijin following close behind. Apido appeared to be holding some kind of wooden bucket as she approached, and Zijin also appeared to be holding one too. Those two had been rather elusive since my return to the village. I hadn't seen as much of them as I had the others. I hadn't really bothered to follow up due to helping everyone else out and trying to get things to a functioning level. Though, maybe I should have at least asked what they were up to. It wasn't wise to just let two monsters as strong as they were roam around aimlessly. Apido, Zijin. I greeted as I turned to face them once they were close enough. Where have the two of you been? I asked. Though judging by the way the two of them froze and started to become nervous, it seemed I may have implied they were in some kind of trouble. Please forgive our unannounced leave of absence, my lord. Zijin immediately cut in as he bowed his head apologetically, Apido quickly doing the same. I wasn't really mad, but if it kept them from disappearing like that again, then I wouldn't tell them that. Can I at least ask what you were doing? I asked, still rather curious as to why they'd been out of the village in the first place. Oh, of course, Apido responded, stuttering slightly, before hovering closer and gently placing the bucket she'd been holding down on the floor at my feet. Wait, is that? There was no denying the sweet scent and that thick yellow liquid structure. Zijin and I had left the village for the Dryad territory to collect honey as per the agreement. The honey was useful in helping provide for the goblins in your absence. They all seemed pleased by it. Apido explained, confirming my thought that this was in fact honey. Oh, I did tell them to do that, didn't I? To be honest, I had forgotten about the fact that Apido and Zijin were given this task. I thought sheepishly, feeling kind of bad for berating them. Still though, it looked as though they were actually doing great. But seriously, I'm probably lucky to have run into Apido and Zijin when I did. The fact that she can make honey makes her more invaluable than I had originally thought. I immediately manifested a wooden spoon, crouched down, and took a scoop of honey. The moment it made contact with my tongue, my mouth exploded with a flavor of sweetness I had yet to taste in this world, nor could it compare to anything from my old world really. It was just that good. It wasn't overly sweet like the honey in my old world either, it was just right. I wasn't sure whether this was because Apido was the one who made it, and perhaps had a unique method due to her higher level of intelligence compared to regular small bees, or if the source of the nectar being the magical fruits of the trance actually had something to do with it as well. Regardless, this was perfect, and would probably sell really well if we were able to mass produce it, and if she couldn't, that means we could charge a higher price for it. That was something I would bring up another time though. For now, being able to provide for the village came first. MMHHMM, this is definitely good. I praised Apido, who glowed from the praise and her cheeks became slightly dusted in pink. Zijin, on the other hand, while it wasn't as obvious, I could still feel the pride he felt. Are all my subordinates going to be like this? I couldn't really say whether that was good or bad. Do you think you could set aside some of your daily produce? About a quarter should do fine? I asked. I was hoping to bring some honey for the ogres as well. I'm sure it would go really well with the herbal tea that they made, and the sweetness of the honey would blend well with the spiciness of the meat they cooked as well. Of course, it will be done. Both Apido and Zijin replied as they bowed their heads. Good, then keep up the good work, I said with a nod. These two were fine additions to the village, and that honey from Apido would really help around. I decided to keep the bucket that they'd given to me, storing it within my stomach. After my chat with the insectoids, I went to the fields that were being made in the outskirts of the village, being overseen by Rigard and one of the goblin lords. All in all, things seemed to be going well so far. I wasn't a master farmer by any means, meaning that I couldn't be sure of anything. Great Sage was a big help in helping with the basic fielding and planting, though I'd need to find some experts. The Dryads would probably be the best ones to turn to, being tree spirits and all. They were bound to know more than I did and be in a better position to teach the goblins than any other monster out there. Lord Rimuru, we weren't expecting you, Rigard said as he quickly approached me upon spotting me. All the other goblins that were in the fields turned our way upon hearing his outburst and seemed just as surprised. It's fine. I just found some free time and decided to check on how things were going with the farming projects. Please continue as you were, I said, the last part loud enough for the rest of the goblins to hear. With a loud cry of "Yes, sir," they continued their tasks. Turning to Rigard, I couldn't help but notice that he seemed to have gotten a bit bigger and muscular compared to before I left the ogre village. He definitely seemed a little bit stronger too. Notice, the individual Rigard further evolved into a goblin king upon being designated as leader of all the goblins by the other goblin lords. So, he grew stronger in a manner similar to Ranga and Raya due to his position amongst the goblins. That's actually kinda cool. Guess monsters evolve in all kinds of ways. I thought to myself, before something else registered in what Great Sage had just said. Still though, to think the other goblin lords just dumped this major responsibility. Not that I can complain since I did the same when I named them. There had been no complaints about the hierarchy so far, so why fix something that didn't need fixing? I'd see how things went and adjust as needed. So how has the farming been going? I asked Rigard as we walked through the field, looking over the sprouting plants. There's nothing significant to report as of yet, my lord. As a trial, we've only planted a few of each type of the seeds you gave us, mainly so we can see which ones are edible and which ones will be negatively impacted by the environment, Rigard reported. I couldn't help but agree with his approach. It was best to plant a few of each type and monitor how they grew for now, rather than to plant a bunch of potentially dangerous plants that would do more harm than good. Though, there has been one issue, my lord. Rigard spoke up hesitantly, almost as though he was afraid of offending me or something, which given how these goblins tended to act in my presence may not be too far from the truth. What is it? I asked. Better he tell me now and we see what could be done, rather than leave it as is and then have bigger problems later. Well, you see, we goblins have always relied on the bounty of the forest for food and small creatures that we could hunt. Given our previously small sizes, that was enough to get us by, meaning we have no proper experience when it comes to farming, Rigard admitted as he lowered his head in shame. I'd already suspected as much when I saw the goblins earlier. Most of what you see is what we managed to learn from the dwarf brothers, but given their talents lay more with craftsmanship than farming, there was only so much they could teach us. Yes, I could definitely see where the problem was now. The goblins needed an experienced guide, someone who was well-versed in farming and vegetables. I myself wouldn't be able to help with this one. Perhaps that visit to the Dryads was going to happen a lot sooner than I had originally assumed. Yes, I can see that definitely being a problem. If not shown the proper care, these plants won't grow regardless of their environment. Fortunately, I may have a solution. Ranga, I called out, and almost immediately the Alpha Tempest wolf jumped out of my shadow and landed right in front of me. Yes, master. How may I be of service? Ranga asked enthusiastically. I wordlessly approached him as he lowered himself, allowing me to climb onto him easily. I turned towards Rigard. All right, Rigard, Ranga and I are going on a quick trip. We should be back by sunset at the most, earlier with shadow movement, I told the Goblin King, who looked shocked at the sudden announcement. To be fair, I had just decided to leave in the spur of the moment. My lord, are you sure it's wise to go alone, my lord? I could quickly arrange a small party to go with you, Rigard said. No, that won't be necessary. I might already be pushing it by bringing Rongo along with me, I immediately said, quashing that idea. The fact that the Dryads rarely showed themselves means they didn't want their domain to be found and preferred their privacy. Where will we be going, master? Ranga asked curiously as he turned his head to glance at me with his left eye. To the territory of the Dryads. Their knowledge and expertise in plant life and forestry in general may prove to be invaluable in helping with agricultural growth. You could stand to learn a lot from them. I responded, much to the shock of both Rigard and Ranga. I guess the prospect of seeing the Dryads again so soon was a bit surprising, given how they hadn't been seen in 100 years. If all went well, then this village's agricultural techniques and growth would boom within the following weeks. The goblins wouldn't need to worry about food for a very long time, and could even stock things up for winter and the like. Then there was the suggestion made by King Gazel, the creation of a nation. If, and that was a really strong if, I decided to forge my own nation of monsters within the great forest of Jura, then things such as farming and agriculture were going to be of extreme importance. So gaining the knowledge and experience to grow a large variety of crops would help with food and even things like materials. I also had a feeling that as managers of the forest, the Dryads would want to be involved with anything that would improve living conditions of all monsters of Jura in the long term. Very well, I'll ensure that no problems arise in your absence, so please do not worry. Rigard reassured firmly as he placed his right hand to his chest. Right, I'll leave it to you then. I responded with a nod. Ranga took that as his cue wordlessly took off, dashing out the village, leaving nothing but a trail of dust. The trip to the Dryads' part of the forest actually took us a bit longer than I thought it would, reminding me yet again that the great forest of Jura was actually pretty huge. If it weren't for shadow movement, it may have taken us even longer. But thankfully, we got there within 2 hours. Even as we approached the domain, the very nature of the air around us suddenly changed, the magicules seemingly less potent but much stronger. The air smelled a lot more fresh and free, having some sort of soothing effect on my body and mind. Honestly speaking, it even felt a little familiar, but I was pretty sure that this was my first time coming here. Perhaps it was this calming nature that made it so? I hopped off Ranga and landed on his left side, petting the large wolf with my right hand as I walked up and stopped next to his head. Trainee, I called out. I didn't bother shouting or anything since I was pretty sure the Dryads were aware of my approach from the moment I left the village. Their ability to see everything in the forest was as useful as it was terrifying, but I was teaching myself not to think about it. You called, Lord Rimuru? Trainee said as she and her sisters appeared before me, despite only the former being called. Though to be fair, I did arrive in their territory for the first time unannounced, and I did bring Ranga with me. Regardless of their sensory abilities, it was probably a bit thoughtless of me. I mentally noted before responding. Sorry for the intrusion. I know you and your sisters are busy with your responsibilities in being the caretakers of the great Jura forest, especially with the heightened tensions caused by my mother's disappearance. But I would appreciate it if you and your sisters could lend your assistance in a certain task. Of course, Lord Rimuru. We would happily do whatever you would ask of us, so long as it is within our power. We always have time for you. Trya happily answered with a serene smile. Thank you, that means a lot, I say with a slight blush before focusing on the matter at hand. In addition to bringing 4 dwarven craftsmen and artisans to aid in the development of the growing town built by the hobgoblins and wolves while also training them in said arts, I also brought seeds of different crops that I thought would be invaluable in farming to increase their food supply. Unfortunately, even the expertise the dwarves and I can offer in agriculture is ultimately limited. Since you all are experts in plants, I was wondering if you 3 wouldn't mind lending your expertise to improve their farming techniques? It could go a long way in boosting their food supply. And I also want someone trustworthy to keep an eye on the plants in case they mutate into plant monsters or become an invasive species that threatens the ecology of the forest. Of course, Lord Rimuru. We would be honored, Trainee happily replied with a smile while she and her sisters also bowed in response, happy to be of assistance to Lady Viridia's heir and their new lord. I still found their sense of devotion to be a bit unnerving, or maybe it was the fact that I could actually feel it. Thanks, I really appreciate it. If need be, you can take a portion of the harvest as compensation for your work. As long as it doesn't negatively impact the village's growth, it should be fine, I stated, wanting to compensate them somehow, though the Dryads only giggled in response, which confused me a little. While the gesture is appreciated, Lord Rimuru, it is not necessary. For you see, these bodies you see are spiritual in nature, and thus do not need sustenance in the same way that the material bodies of most species within the forest do. For us, food is a luxury, not a necessity, Trainee said in an amused tone. Although, I do believe the additional yield could be used for other things, such as establishing trade with other villages within Jura. It would help word of your presence to finally start spreading in the forest, Trainee suggested, though it was clear she wanted to make my presence known within the forest. Trainee was both calculative and cunning in various ways, but neither of them were necessarily bad. It just depended if your goals aligned with hers. The best example I could give was the fact that she was loyal to me due to being my mother's son. She wanted all the creatures in the forest to know that the forest wasn't without a guardian and ruler, but wouldn't advertise my presence without my permission. Aside from me and my mother, Trainee also had a strong sense of duty towards the forest in itself, keeping it safe and flourishing and ensuring that the forest remained untouched by the surrounding threats. To that end, while she was loyal to me and wouldn't dare question me should I ask her to do something, she also wasn't afraid to make suggestions of her own and maybe push me down a certain path that she felt would be beneficial for me and the forest as a whole. To be honest, her idea of spreading the word of my awakening made me remember King Gazel's suggestion once more. Maybe it really was best if I thought about the prospect of founding a nation. People often said that leaders weren't born but made. I was currently the strongest monster within this forest, so if monsters truly respected power as much as I'd been led to believe, then it shouldn't take much convincing to persuade them to join me. Trainee, what do you think about me forming a nation of monsters within Jura? I asked the Dryad. She'd been managing for far longer, and thus her opinion was important here. She was one of the only people that I could ask for an opinion due to how knowledgeable she and her sisters were. Forging a nation of monsters within Jura? She questioned, wanting to make sure she had heard correctly. I nodded my head in response before speaking. Yeah, it's something that King Gazel, the ruler of the armed nation of Dworgen, suggested after I told him of my heritage. And it's something that's been on my mind since. I explained. I think it's a wondrous idea. Trainee exclaimed as she clasped her hands in front of her excitedly. Much to my surprise, the notion of uniting the various tribes of Jura would lead to us being collectively stronger than we are right now. Not to mention it would make our jobs of maintaining the peace within the forest much easier. Yes, I agree. And with the threats of the surrounding lands wanting to also take advantage of my mother's disappearance, it's important to make a strong front, I said as a frown appeared on my face. And unfortunately, that's something I can't do on my own. Individually, I'm far weaker than my mother, so my presence, while a potential threat, will not be enough to deter the surrounding nations. Coming together in numbers will be the best way to make ourselves strong. That is also a valid concern, Trainee said as she nodded her head. However, even the respect and authority that we Dryads have in the forest would not be enough to make such a thing possible. Not unless someone strong enough were to stand at the helm of this nation, someone such as Lady Viridia herself, or you, her heir. Trainee added, not bothering with being subtle this time around. So she agrees that it's possible, but only if I take the role as the leader of this nation. Not like I was planning to build a nation and then pass the job to someone else. Monsters respect power and are willing to follow the leadership of someone they view as powerful. I thought with a sigh. The Dryads were powerful, with Trainee being even stronger than her sisters, but their strength wouldn't be enough to get the other stronger species of Jura to follow them. I see. Thank you for your opinion. I thank them for their advice. Does this mean you're aiming to potentially establish a nation, Lord Rimuru? Trainee asked, sounding almost excited at the prospect. Maybe, to be honest, this was not how I thought things would go. I said with a heavy sigh as I realized that things were starting to turn out far differently than I had envisioned when I first left my mother's cave. When my mother told me to watch over the forest as the new guardian, I intended to do that. Perhaps whilst being a bit more interactive with those living in the forest, but I never saw myself ruling over anyone. My way would have been similar to my mother's, just without the whole destroying nations thing and being more interactive with the inhabitants of the forest. But that dream of perhaps living something akin to a shut-in life vanished the moment I left the cave. Anyways, I still haven't decided on anything concrete yet. But given the current course of events, it's most likely that I may end up being left with no choice. I responded with a sigh, though I suppose it wouldn't be all that bad. Kaijin and the dwarf brothers are already making large contributions to the town, meaning things such as clothing, construction, and weaponry wouldn't be too much of a problem. Food all depended on how fast our population grew and which species joined. Some monsters tend to be more gluttonous than others. There was a lot to think about, and that included if this was what the inhabitants of the forest would also want. If I chose to go this route, I'd be bringing a major change to the forest that would make it nothing like it was before. The monsters may follow me as a result of my strength, but may also feel as though I was taking away the freedom they had when my mother was guardian of the forest. I wouldn't force anyone to do anything, but others may feel compelled to do so regardless. Well, I appreciate your willingness to assist the developing town with their farming techniques, along with your counsel on this topic. I tell them, of course, Lord Rimuru. We are always happy to help you in any way we can. Trainee happily says while she and her sisters once again bow out of respect for me. With that taken care of, there has been one thing that has been bothering me. This place, it feels familiar in a way that I can't seem to describe, even though I'm pretty sure that this is my first time coming here. I explained, the warmth within me and sense of familiarity hadn't left since I first came here. And while it wasn't a bad feeling, it did leave me wondering why. I don't know. I guess I just get all warm inside and feel kind of relaxed. The Dryad sisters merely glanced at each other, their emotions almost exploding with positivity and pride. They then nodded towards each other before turning towards me, all smiles and excited. Lord Rimuru, if you have the time, would you be willing to come wood with us for a moment? Trainee asked as she gestured towards the forest that they called home. Are you sure that's okay? I've heard that you don't normally welcome others within your domain. I asked, slightly confused as to why they were inviting me deeper into their domain. While there are reasons for that, none of those would apply to you, my lord. Doris spoke up as she stepped beside Trainee. Yes, Lady Viridia was the one to grant us refuge within her domain. This territory still falls under that domain, and said domain is now yours. Trias said with a small giggle. My sisters are right. As it stands, you now have authority over the great forest and all its territories. Besides, we're the ones inviting you, and Ranga too. Trainee said as she walked up to the large wolf and began to pet his head. I am honored, Ranga replied, his tail wagging as he took pleasure in having the back of his ears rubbed. Well, I suppose there really was no reason not to. In fact, it would be rude of me. Besides, I was getting to see something that many people only ever dreamed of seeing. I couldn't help but wonder if they were more Dryads within their territory, and if so, why had I not yet met them? Besides, I was curious as to what it was that Trainee and her sisters wanted to show me. All right then, lead the way, I replied with a smile. The Dryads promptly did so, Ranga and I following them as we ventured deeper in their territory. It was mostly just trees like the rest of the forest, but these trees actually had a faint glow to them, similar to the Dryads, and their leaves were vibrant green. The magicules in the air were also higher here than usual, but that was to be expected in a habitat that was occupied with high A-rank monsters/spirits. It was nothing like the sealed cave where my mother had been, but it was the place with the second highest magicule concentration I'd been to since. As we walked deeper into the woods, the magicules in the air continued to get thicker, expanding my senses a bit. I was surprised by what I felt. The trees here, they're alive? I couldn't help but wonder. Whilst they looked like ordinary trees, some of them were filled with not only tons of magicules, but they even had emotions that I could sense. What the heck was up with that? From some of them, I could sense curiosity as we passed by. Obviously, they were sentient enough to be able to acknowledge our presence. Are these trees something similar to you Dryads? I couldn't help but ask out of curiosity. They actually are Trance, our male counterparts, Lord Rimuru, Trainee explained. Though unlike we Dryads, they rarely leave their host trees, mostly because they are more limited in how far they can move away from their host trees. Wow, as interesting as that sounds, it also sounds rough. Not being able to move around with freedom must suck. Assuming they don't genuinely prefer being within their trees, I don't think I would enjoy being stuck in a tree all the time. I thought. So, why exactly have you brought us here? And why does this area seem familiar to me, despite me never being here before? I couldn't help but ask. This, Lord Rimuru, is the part of our territory we used whenever Lady Viridia asked us to watch over you back when you were still in your egg. Trainee revealed, causing my and Ranga's eyes to widen in surprise. Lady Viridia offered us refuge here in the Great Jura Forest when we were separated from the Queen of Spirits. And in gratitude, we offered our services to her to serve as the forest caretakers. But in addition to that, Lady Viridia also trusted us to occasionally watch over your egg during occasions when she had to leave the forest. That's right, Trainee did mention something like that the day we first met. I can't believe I didn't connect the dots sooner. I mentally berate myself. It certainly made sense that my mother would bring my egg here. Not only were the Dryads strong and capable enough to protect it from most threats, but the amount of magicules in the air were a good substitute to wherever my mother's nest or dwelling was prior to her sealing, meaning my body still had plenty of sustenance to both develop and preserve itself. We kept on going until we reached what I could only assume was the center of the territory due to the enormous tree that stood in front of us. This thing was at least like 20 times thicker than your average tree and nearly 50 times taller. The tree, while huge and flowing with magicules, was not sentient like the rest, and instead seemed to be feeding the land in itself, with said magicules being absorbed by the trance and dryads of the forest. At the base of the tree was a well-decorated area, with large roots surrounding it almost as though protecting something. Getting closer, it became clear that this was, or rather used to be, a nest of some kind. More than likely where the Dryads used to keep the egg after my mother handed it to them. The layers of leaves and flowers on the floor creating a soft floor, a large bird-like nest made out of straw, or something which was most definitely where the egg was kept, and the giant roots and vines surrounding the place, most likely to protect the egg from the natural elements. All in all, this was a well-fortified shelter, and it showed that the Dryads had really put a lot of thought into this and were dedicated to paying the trust my mother had given them. Man, you guys really did your best, huh? It was less of a question and more of an observation. Of course, Lady Viridia entrusted us with something that was very precious to her, so much so that no one aside from us and her knew of your existence. Trainee said rather seriously, it was rather uncharacteristic of her. She usually either had a serene and elegant vibe, or she had a mischievous and playful side. My mother told me she kept watch over my egg for thousands of years, due to how long it took to hatch. Did no one else really know? To be honest, my brief encounter with my mother had led me to believe that she wasn't the best at keeping secrets, so I was kind of skeptical. Lord Rimuru, honestly, we don't have the full story ourselves. But from what Lady Viridia told us, she had always wanted an heir, a child of her own. She once spoke about how her sisters had gone their own paths following powerful figures of the world, but she had no desire to go on the same path. While she was elusive to the details of your birth, and who helped father you, we did learn that once she found out she was with child, she took every precaution to ensure your safety. Trainee said as my attention was now fixed on the eldest of the Dryad sisters. She claimed Jura as her domain nearly 2,000 years ago, ensuring that humans wouldn't dare enter, lest they discover you, and knowing that the monsters would never dare approach her nest without permission, also your egg would have a safe environment to grow. Wait, are you saying my mother claimed this entire forest just so my egg would be protected? That seemed kind of ludicrous, but it also made sense. The egg of a true dragon was something that adventurers and kingdoms would most likely wage war over. Indeed, though to be honest, it was a fair trade. Many of the monster species that migrated here not only got a place to live, but they all live under the protection of the storm dragon. The only cost was that they would be unknowingly serving as layers of defense, which wasn't really a downside since few people were stupid enough to enter the domain of Lady Viridia. Trainee explained. Guess she really wasn't giving up on that egg hatching. I mumbled more to myself than anyone really. Most monsters would have assumed the child within the egg was dead or was simply too weak to hatch on its own and thus would eventually die. But she chose to keep faith that the egg would hatch, regardless of whatever soul inhabited said body. I was still surprised at the fact that she had so willingly accepted me despite knowing I was a human from another world. It was unnatural. Then again, given the circumstances, I guess I can understand her a little bit. Thanks for showing me this, I said to the Dryads, a smile on my face as I kept my eyes on the nest for a while longer. A few days passed since I'd managed to convince the Dryads to help with the agricultural development of the town, and I had to say things were looking up a lot more in that department than they had been before. The goblins were looking forward to a bountiful harvest when the time came. Now, obviously the Dryads had their own duties to the forest, so we agreed that one of them would be checking on the goblins about twice a week. mainly in regards to agriculture. But if the goblins had something important they wanted to share with me while I was away, then the dryads would deliver. Speaking of leaving, it was time for me to finally head back to the ogre village. I'd done enough to jumpstart this place for the time being and would check up on everyone regularly enough, but otherwise with the dwarves and dryads helping out, this village was on its way to becoming one of the most developed settlements in the forest. Everyone had gathered to see Ranga and I off. I decided to take Ranga with me, the alpha wolf having become something of a partner, familiar, and friend all packed into one. I was confident that Raya would be able to handle things with the rest of the Tempest wolves in the meantime. All right, everyone, I'm off now. I called out from on top of Ranga. Right. Please take care of yourself, Lord Rimuru. Rigard said as he stood in a straight posture, trying and failing to hold his composure as tears appeared in the corner of his eyes. I should be the one saying that. I'll be counting on you to take care of everyone. I responded before turning towards Kaijin and the dwarf brothers. Thanks again for coming here, guys. I get the feeling this town is just going to keep on growing with your help. I'll be popping by often enough to brainstorm ideas for development and the like. Don't mention it. Compared to what you did for us, this is nothing, Garm said with a grin and a thumbs up. Yeah, you literally saved our lives and gave us high-paying jobs. If anything, we should be the ones thanking you, Dord said with a grateful smile and a nod, one that I returned. Hum. MYRD hummed in agreement as he nodded. I'd get that guy to talk one day. I don't know how or when, but I'd do it. They've pretty much said it all, but you don't have to worry. We'll make this village into something great. Just make sure you pop up often enough, Kaijin said with a grin. Oh, and don't worry about the troops and all that. I'll put them through the ringer until you get some proper teachers, he added with a bit of a sadistic laugh. That's right. Given Kaijin's military background, I'd asked him to fill in for me in training the goblins and wolves. I wasn't expecting much since he was now a full-time blacksmith, but it was better than just having them train blindly. Hopefully the ogre chief would be willing to spare some of his people for the job. I can't wait to see the results when I come back then, I said, before looking at everyone gathered once more. See you guys soon, I shouted as Ranga and I took off into the forest. Goodbye, Lord Rimuru. The loud cries of the goblins echoed throughout the forest, accompanied by the louder howls of the Tempest wolves. In a matter of seconds, they were out of sight and earshot due to Ranga's speed. They'll be fine. Besides, I'll be checking in often enough, I told myself. It wasn't long until we entered the ogre's territory. With Ranga's speed and stamina, we'd been able to make it within the hour, and thanks to Great Sage, making something akin to a mental map in my head, keeping track of all the locations I'd been to, we hadn't gotten lost and had found our way pretty easily. Ranga was moving through the tree lanes like a hound of hell. To a normal person, they either would have fallen off ages ago, or they wouldn't be able to see anything due to how fast he was moving. Ogre Flame. With numerous cries, a large torrent of flames suddenly came our way out of the blue, quickly bringing Ranga to a grind halt before he leapt to the right to avoid the attack. What the heck? I was immediately on guard as I wondered why the heck we were getting attacked out of the blue. It was then that numerous ogres came out of the bushes, about 7 or so, and they all charged towards Ranga weapons hot, putting the Tempest wolf on edge as he growled at the approaching enemies. I recognized 1 or 2 of them as part of the young master's troop, meaning they really were from the ogre village. If that was the case, then why are they attacking us? Notice, due to your suppressed aura, the ogres did not sense your presence, but the individual Ranga has not suppressed his aura. Thus, it can be assumed the ogres sensed an incoming threat and reacted accordingly. Of course, and given that we were making a beeline for their village at such insane speeds, it's only natural that they would react as they did, I surmised. I quickly jumped off Ranga, landing in front of him, and released a portion of my aura, about 30% give or take. Stop, I shouted as my aura flared, and actually threw the unexpecting ogres back a bit. I suppressed my aura just as quickly as it burst out, bringing it down to a level where most would be able to sense my presence, but not enough to scare anyone, more than sure that the ogres would at the very least think twice before attacking again. Sure enough, as they stood up, they seemed to be more on the side of caution, at least until their eyes fell on me. Their eyes widened as they recognized me instantly, and the horrid realization of what they had done crashed down on them like a large boulder. Immediately, the leader of the group went down on one knee and bowed his head. "Lord Rimuru, please forgive our reckless assault." The ogre pleaded as he hung his head low. I didn't even need desire to see the fear and anxiety that he was feeling in that moment. "Lord Rimuru, huh? Guess the rest of the village knows about my heritage then." I concluded. I wasn't surprised by this really. The ogres seemed to be the type to respect titles and stature. The chief must have spread word after I left. I just hoped this didn't change their opinions of me too much. I kinda liked where I stood with the ogres before. Not too formal, but not too informal either. There was a chance that progress had been compromised by the revelation of my heritage. I shook my head sideways as I brought myself back to the situation at hand. By now, the other ogres involved in the attack had also gone down on their knees asking for forgiveness. Did these guys think I was going to take their lives over a misunderstanding or something? Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they did. Monsters tended to think differently from humans, and despite being a monster now, I still had a very human mentality. Be at ease. I know a misunderstanding when I see one. I shouldn't have hidden my own aura so well. It's only natural you would assume Ranga was an enemy otherwise. I reassured them. I could tell they were more than a little surprised at the fact that Ranga was a named creature, but they didn't say anything about it, probably having heard about it from when I asked the Dryads to deliver a message to the ogre village. "But we attacked you and your companion," the lead ogre responded. And I said it's fine. No hard feelings, right, Ranga? Right? If the master won't hold it against you, then I have no reason to. Ranga responded with a loud bark. "Thank you, my lord. You are truly kind." The ogre responded. I couldn't help but sigh as it seemed that familiarity truly had vanished. I really hoped it wasn't all the ogres who'd fallen into this sense of formality. Right. Well, we were on our way to the village. I've handled all the affairs I set out to deal with. Please allow us to escort you. I'm sure everyone will be pleased by your return," the lead ogre said as he and his party stood. "Sure, why not?" I said with a shrug as I climbed back onto Ranga. The ogres in the village had more than likely already felt my small display of power just now, so it was either they hadn't sent a party to investigate or they were already preparing for my arrival. With that, the ogre party led Ranga and I through the forest towards the village. Regardless of whatever changes, I was looking forward to seeing everyone again. The walk back to the village was about as silent and awkward as I expected it to be. The ogre party was clearly embarrassed over the recent encounter and were still feeling plenty ashamed, but they still did their best to be hospitable. It didn't take long until the village gates were in sight, and as I'd pretty much expected, most of the village was already gathered by said gates. A pair of ogres had branched from the rest of the troop earlier, probably going on ahead to give the rest of the village a heads up about my approach. "Lord Rimuru, we are truly honored and overjoyed by your return to our village." The collective response of all the ogres present at the gate, all of whom were bowing and kneeling on a single knee. I couldn't help but sigh a little at the over-the-top and zealous reception I got from the ogre village, with the feeling of pride and happiness and amazement being felt through desire. Though I ultimately wasn't too surprised by the reaction I had received, given the revelation of my heritage and subsequent significance to the Jura forest. The fact that I had asked the Dryads to inform them of the delay of my return likely did not help, due to a mix of anxiety on how to treat me now and the Dryads simply appearing undoubtedly served to confirm my heritage to the ogres. I jumped off Ranga, just in time too as the chief and his family approached us. The chief and his wife seemed relieved to see me. The ogre princess was actually happy, which made me feel kinda warm on the inside. I hadn't forgotten the fact that she might potentially be one of the women I was destined to be with. Lastly was the young master. The guy couldn't even meet my eyes, though given our last interaction, I didn't blame him. I'd had plenty of time to think about how I'd handle what happened with him when I got back, because I doubted it was something that would just be swept under the carpet, so to speak. And personally, I didn't want to hold a grudge or anything like that. The guy was literally the heir of this village, and I really liked it here, so getting along with him was a must. Besides, I had a feeling that when he wasn't busy being a paranoid, egotistical, and overprotective jerk, he was actually a pretty decent guy. I doubt any child born from the chief and chiefess would be anything less. Lord Rimuru, please allow me to welcome you back into our village. The chief said as he and his family gave a quick bow. I was pretty sure they would have been respectful of my return regardless of my heritage being revealed or not, but they were probably taking it up a notch because of it. It's good to be back, I said with a nod and a smile. It really was. This place was the closest thing I had to a home in this world, hence the reason I'd been so eager to come back as quickly as possible. I then turned towards Ranga, who was beside me, and began to pet him. I believe introductions are in order. This here is Ranga, my loyal companion, and the head of the Tempest Wolf Pack. It's nice to meet you. Master has spoken highly about this village, Ranga said with a loud bark, tail wagging in excitement. The honor is ours, Sir Ranga, the chief said with a quick bow towards the wolf. He wasn't as surprised as I thought he would be at Ranga being named. Then again, I'm sure the Dryads had filled them in on enough details. I was a bit surprised that he would actually bow at Ranga, but I quickly remembered two things. Firstly, aside from myself, Ranga was currently the strongest individual in the village in terms of magicules alone. And as usual, the ogres respected sentient and powerful creatures. The second being that I'd introduced him as my familiar/companion, making it clear that I was the one who named him and granted him his power. So out of respect to me, they were also showing some to Ranga. It seemed you had quite the adventure upon leaving our walls, the chiefess suddenly said with a bright smile, one that quickly reminded me of Trainee, awkwardly enough. I remember thinking vice versa back in the Goblin Village. Those two should really not be allowed to meet, I thought as I tried to think of ways to prevent the two schemers from directly interacting with each other. But it all seemed to have worked out in the end. The princess responded, drawing my attention. I'm just glad that you returned to us safe and sound, Lord Rimuru. She responded with a giggle. My daughter is right. Your return and success in your endeavors is a cause for celebration, Lord Rimuru. Tonight we will hold an outdoor feast in your honor. The chief with a nod and a smile. I wanted to refuse. The welcome party had been more than enough. But I would be lying if I said I didn't want to try their cooking again after so long. Sure enough, night soon came and the celebrations and feasting started. The atmosphere seemed to be good all around. The ogres seemed genuinely happy and festive tonight, dancing to the music, feasting on the food, and just talking and laughing amongst each other. Feeling the positive energy in the atmosphere through desire was enough to make me not regret speaking against the idea of a celebration. One ogre in particular caught my attention during all this. It was the purple ogress I was teaching to cook. She turned out to be quite the skilled dancer when it came to festive occasions such as this one. Her moves are traditional as her body would sway and move rhythmically to the music. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on perspective, that resulted in her heavy assets swinging around in a manner that drew the eyes of many ogres. It certainly didn't help that her attire left a certain amount of cleavage for people to see. I tried to ignore the irritation I felt at the others gazing at her. The ogres had even been kind enough to set a large wooden bowl of meat for Ranga. The Tempest Wolf happily devours the meat whilst interacting with the ogres that chose to approach him. Many couldn't believe that he was once a dire wolf, a C-rank monster, and now he was on the lower spectrum of A rank. I see, so that's what happened. The ogre chief said. I'd been retelling the tales of my adventures to him, his family, the elder, and other notable members of the village. We were all seated on the largest table with lots of food present for us to help ourselves to. Yeah, it was a lot more than I originally set out for, but everything seemed to work out in the end, I said as I took a sip of the fruit juice next to me. If I may, Lord Rimuru, why did you feel the need to take in the goblins and wolves in the first place? The chiefess suddenly asked. It wasn't that I needed to, but rather things just ended up turning out that way. The initial goblins offered their loyalty in exchange for my aid and protection. As for the wolves, they chose to submit me as a result of sparing the rest of their pack. As for the goblins that followed, as I said earlier, that was mainly to even out the population, or at least make sure the goblins could settle comfortably with the wolves. I said with a shrug. I didn't deny them that. In the end, I'm still guardian to the whole forest, but they get more attention from me since they're my subordinates. Even so, was it necessary to name them? I don't mean to belittle you, but naming a monster is a dangerous task, even to one as powerful as yourself. especially so many monsters? The princess asked in concern. Don't worry, I named them in batches so I wouldn't do more harm than good. And I recover magicules faster than the average monster. I reassured the princess. She still looked a bit concerned, but didn't say anything more. The true harm in naming comes from either attempting to name one stronger than yourself or naming too many monsters at once. Other than that, one should recover from the process given enough time. Thanks to my sub-skill drainage, I could absorb magicules from the environment faster to regain my strength, which was how I recovered quickly. This skill also allowed me to passively grow stronger at a slow rate through absorbing magicules in the air. The higher the magicule density in an area, the more I grew in strength. I grew. Besides, I also had other reasons for naming them. I stated, drawing the attention of the ogres present. The first being to make them stronger and more united. As they were, the goblins were too weak to defend themselves in any manner. They would be too reliant on the wolves for protection in my absence. This would result in the wolves looking down on the goblins and mistreating them. I see. So you named them in order to evolve them so they could better defend themselves, which would allow them to also fight alongside the wolves, creating a sense of camaraderie among them. The chief said with a smirk as he nodded his head. I wasn't surprised to see that he had seen through my trick. But wouldn't naming the wolves just increase the gap strength between the wolves and goblins again? The princess asked. I couldn't help the grin that made its way onto my face. The goblins and wolves both grew tremendously as a result of me naming them. The goblins went from E rank to C rank, turning into hobgoblins and goblinas, while the dire wolves went through a unique evolution due to my affinities and became tempest wolves, going from D rank to B rank monsters with their leaders on the lower end of their rank. I explained as the ogre's eyes widened slightly at the revelation. At face value, the difference in power may have increased between them, but that's only if you look at it from a magicule perspective. This is where things such as gear, arts, and skills come into play. I understand now. The goblins are a humanoid race, and thus are much more capable of learning than the wolves. That means where they lack in magicules, they can make up with arts and weapons. The elder said as he stroked his beard. This is part of the reason you sought out artisans in Dworgen, isn't it? The elder himself was a testament to the fact that magicules weren't everything. Individuals like the young master and princess surpassed him in energy, but his physical prowess, skill, and experience was still far above theirs. And that was enough to almost always guarantee him victory. That's part of the reason. The goblins also had no talents in making clothing or constructions at all. Watching them attempt to make a house was rather sad. I said with a sigh as I remember the structure they had shown me before I decided to leave for Dworgen. Things have certainly improved since I got the dwarves to come to the village, and the goblins seem to be learning well under them. They've got clothing and proper shelters. They've even started growing their own food under the guidance of the dryads, who have some expertise in agricultural techniques, though they're currently still reliant on the bounty of the forest. It seems like things are going well for them then, the chief said with a few nods. My lord, if you don't mind me asking, why didn't you come to us when searching for artisans? The chiefess suddenly asked as everyone on the table turned to her with wide eyes. Our village is plenty capable in craftsmanship. I did think of it, but I reconsidered. I answered, drawing the attention back to me. I simply figured that you wouldn't want to take part in a task that involved weaker races given the pride of the ogres. While it's true that we ogres only acknowledge those we view as strong, we still would have aided in your endeavor. The chief spoke up. Is that so? I said as I turned to the chief, his eyes meeting with my own. I'm pretty sure he was saying this because of my heritage, but whether he actually meant was a completely different matter. The chief merely nodded his head without turning his eyes away from my own. Well, honestly speaking, there is still one area they need help in. The goblins in particular. I wasn't willing to entrust this task to foreigners from other nations. Oh, and what may that be? The chiefess asked as she leaned forward a bit. Training the goblin forces. I taught them some basics in hand-to-hand and swordsmanship, and some seem to have a knack for archery, but they still require a lot of guidance. I told the chief with a sigh. I hadn't been planning on talking to the chief about this so soon, but I saw an opportunity to bring it up, and I did. I see. And you want us to be the ones that teach them? The chief asked for confirmation. To be fair, I don't really have anyone else to ask," I said with a shrug which prompted a scoff from the young master and a giggle from the chiefess and princess. Like I said, I'd rather not leave this to foreigners, and I don't have enough connections in the forest to ask elsewhere. Though the Dryads intend to help me fix that. Besides, I'm not asking for a lot, just a few individuals that specialize in different kinds of weapons. Yes, that seems to be reasonable, the ogre chief said as he rubbed his chin in thought. I'm not asking this free of charge, by the way. I'm sure we can work out some kind of agreement, but not tonight. We can discuss the details another time. There's no need to rush anything. I reassured him. By now I was sure that the chief was willing to help and listen to what I had to say. The specifics could be ironed out on another date. Tonight was meant to be a night of celebration. Yes, for tonight we feast and celebrate, the chief said with a nod. I could feel a sense of relief from him, more than likely from having more time to think about my proposal rather than being put on the spot. Then again, his wife was the one that brought it up. Right, speaking of festivities, I haven't had the chance to dance yet. Wouldn't be a celebration if I didn't indulge in the fun myself now, would it? I asked with a grin as I stood up. The ogres each nodded their heads as I excused myself and began walking towards the festivities. I then stopped as a thought came to mind. This is either very foolish or very bold. Hopefully it's the latter because fortune is supposed to favor the bold, I mentally said before turning back towards the chief's table, more specifically towards the princess. Everyone on the chief's table had once more turned to me once they noticed my pause. After a few seconds of thinking over my words, I just spoke whatever came to mind. Actually, princess, would you mind joining me on the dance floor? I said with a smile as I stretched out my left hand. If I ignored the shocked cries of the ogres on the chief's tables, the raised eyebrows of the elder and chief, the giggling of the chiefess, and the slightly scrutinizing look from the young master. Instead focused on the princess, whose face seemed to be getting redder and redder by the second. My Lord Rimuru, are you not being a bit too forward? The chiefess teased as the princess' face exploded into a deeper shade of red, her mouth opening and closing as she waved her hands in a poor attempt to refute her mother's words. The rest of the table was too shocked to say anything. I think you're reading too much into it. I'm just asking her to dance with me. A celebration such as this one is meant to be enjoyed with friends and loved ones, and the princess happens to be one of the ogres with whom I'm closest to. I said with a shrug, that was total bullshit. I knew it. She knew it. Hell, everyone on the table knew it, but none of them would call me up on it. Perhaps I am. The chiefess conceded, though I could tell she wasn't buying my excuse. It didn't matter in the end. While I would rather have their approval when I started pursuing the princess, because I am going to pursue her, I haven't started just yet. Reason being I still wanted to get to know her a bit more before I did. That dark elf fortune teller's vision had shown that the princess may be one of my future partners, and that she may evolve in the future, but she also said the future was in my hands. I'd never really thought about having a harem, but then again I also never thought I'd be reincarnated to another world. Whether or not what was in the vision would really happen depended on what I did. So shall we? I asked the princess once more. Regaining her composure, she then turned towards her father who nodded his head in approval. Upon having his approval, she stood and joined me as we left the table and joined the other ogres dancing around the huge bonfire. I allowed myself to just relax and have fun that night. I danced, ate and feasted that night. It was good to be back. Third POV. In another part of the great forest of Jura, near the border leading to the kingdom of Bloomend, 5 individuals could be seen entering the forest. 3 of them were the adventurers that Rimuru had seen upon reaching the entrance to Viridia's cave: Kavul, Aaron, and Jido. Man, I can't believe the guild master asked us to come back to this place just to investigate the monster's behavior. Kavul whined. The 3 of them had been hoping to take a few days of vacation after their exploration of the Storm Dragon's cave, but unfortunately their guild master, Fuse, had different ideas. Hey, you shouldn't complain too much. Guild Master Fuse was kind enough to get us into a party with none other than the rising hero Masayuki, Aaron said as she smacked Kavul with her staff. She was also annoyed by the sudden quest, but she couldn't deny that getting to be in the same party as a hero was a pretty good opportunity, one they may never get again. Their mission was to investigate monster activities within the forest, more specifically to take note of any changes that may have occurred as a result of the storm dragon vanishing. Given how dangerous the monsters within Jura tended to be, the guild master managed to convince the rising hero Masayuki, who just happened to be in the area, to also take part in this mission, offering a sizable reward in exchange. You shouldn't look up to me so highly. I've only recently started my own adventures, so I don't really think I'm deserving of a title such as hero, Masayuki said with a sweat drop, as he tried to save Kavul from getting smacked again. Nonsense, Jido shouted as he walked up to the blonde otherworlder. The fact that you've accomplished so much in such a short amount of time says a lot about how strong you are and your potential. Isn't that right, Shizu? Shizu, the last member of their party, not much was really known about her. She had heard the four of them talking about traveling to Jura and asked if she could join them. So far, she had been the most quiet, only speaking here and there. Even more confusing was the fact that since they'd met her, they'd yet to see her face, since she always seemed to be wearing a mask. Indeed, word of your talents reached all the way to Ingrasia, Masayuki. You should take pride in your accomplishments, she encouraged, her voice gentle and reassuring. That's right, we're the ones lucky to be in a party with you, so we should make sure to learn as much as we can, Erin said with a determined look as she held onto her staff tightly with both hands. As the group continued to move while talking and bickering, mainly Kavul's party, Shizu suddenly stopped and turned to her left side, prompting the others to do the same as they turned to her in confusion. Shizu, is something wrong? Erin asked with a concerned expression. The masked adventurer didn't respond for a few seconds, before turning away from whatever she was looking at and shaking her head sideways. No, I just thought I sensed something for a moment. I must have been mistaken, Shizu said, which immediately put Kavul's party at ease. You shouldn't scare us like that, Shizu. For a moment, I thought a monster was going to jump out of the tree leans or something, Erin said with a nervous laugh. Shizue couldn't help but sigh. These three were very carefree, it seemed. They were walking into a forest filled with monsters, and yet they were now letting their guards down just because she said the coast was clear. It was a miracle they had made it this far on their own. The group continued on their way, heading deeper into the forest. It was only after 5 minutes that a figure stepped out of the area that Shizue had been looking at. The individual in question was none other than Jelmiad, the magen who had attempted to forcefully recruit Zijin and Apido. Fuyu, that was too close, the magen said as he let out a breath of relief. He looked down towards the crystal ball that he was holding in his left hand. Did you see that, my lord? There's no doubt about it. That mask, that name. That woman truly is the hero Shizue Aizawa, the conqueror of flames. I thought she was retired. And that blonde one, Masayuki, they said he was a rising hero. What do we do, Lord Clayman? This could put a dent in our plans. Jelmiad proclaimed in distress. It was bad enough that he had encountered an unknown magen within the forest that was far stronger than he was. But now there were two heroes surveying the forest. Calm yourself, Jelmiad. A calm and calculating voice spoke out from the crystal. This voice belonged to Jelmiad's lord and master, the demon Lord Clayman. While the situation does seem to have changed, there is still a way that we can use this to our advantage. My lord, Jelmiad questioned. He wasn't sure what benefit there was to having two heroes scouring the forest they were in the midst of taking over, but he trusted Lord Clayman to have a plan. The flame hero, Shizue Aizawa, and the newly rising hero, Masayuki. From what I've heard, the Conqueror of Flames retired due to having issues with her elemental spirit. Clayman said thoughtfully, perhaps we can use that to our advantage. If all goes well, I'd gain two powerful puppets, perhaps even replacements for some of my fingers. Yes, my lord, those two would make excellent minions. Jelmiad quickly agreed. Jelmiad, have you heard any word of that magen you encountered? Clayman asked. Yes, my lord. The goblin settlement near where I encountered him has begun to rapidly expand and seems to have also tamed dire wolves. I can only assume this was his doing. Jelmiad responded rather bitterly. He was still sour over being thoroughly humiliated by that stupid magen and being forced to flee, but he knew that he couldn't fight him head-on and hoped to win. Good, then he's still within the forest. Return to Gistav at once. I have a gift for the Conqueror of Flames. Hopefully this guardian will also be lured out. I admit he has piqued my curiosity. Clayman's voice sounded equally amused and cunning. The connection cut before Gelmud could respond, but the Magian knew better than to delay any further. Without another word, he took off into the sky in the direction of Jistaff. His master had plans, big plans, for the forest, the heroes, and that Magian that humiliated him. Gelmud especially wanted to see what would become of that Magian. If his master allowed it, Gelmud would gladly make him food for his Orc Lord. Yes, his power alone would be more than enough to ensure the Orc Lord's evolution into the Orc disaster.